Outside the Law, a wild Western action adventure. Chapter 1. Burt Alvord watched the dust motes dance in the late afternoon light that slanted through the jailhouse window. Each speck caught the sun for a moment, then disappeared back into shadow. Like most everything else in Cochise County, he figured. Here one minute, gone the next, and nobody much caring either way. He leaned back in the wooden chair, felt it creak under his weight. The chair had been complaining about his presence for 3 years now, same as the county seemed to be doing. Outside, a dog barked at something, probably nothing. Dogs in Wilcox were always barking at nothing. Come to think of it, most folks here were always doing something about nothing. The jail cells behind him were empty. Had been for near 2 weeks. Last occupant was old Pete Morales. Slept off a drunk and rode out owing the county 50 cents for meals. Alvord had let it slide. 50 cents wasn't worth the paperwork, and Pete's horse looked hungrier than Pete did. He pulled out his pocket watch. 4:20 in the afternoon. Still 40 minutes till he could lock up and head over to the Wilcox Hotel for supper. Beef stew again, most likely. Seemed like everything in this town happened the same way. Same time every day. Even the train. The Southern Pacific would come through at 5:15, just like it had yesterday and the day before that. Alvord had taken to timing it without thinking about it, the way a man might count his own heartbeat. The whistle would sound first, long and lonesome, carrying across the desert floor. Then the locomotive would appear, black smoke trailing behind it like a funeral veil, pulling its string of cars toward California or back toward Texas, depending on the day. Sometimes he wondered what it would be like to just walk out there and climb aboard. See where it took him. But that was fool thinking. He had responsibilities. A badge. A job that paid $30 a month when the county remembered to pay it. $30. He'd counted it again this morning, the money in his coat pocket. $27.40 to be exact. $3 had gone for a new shirt after his old one had given up the fight against Arizona sun and sweat. $27.40 wouldn't take a man far, even in 1899. The door opened, and heat rolled in like a living thing. Deputy Billy Stiles stepped inside, pushed the door shut behind him, and leaned against it. "Hot enough to fry eggs on a rock out there," Stiles said. "Hot enough to fry the rock," Alvord said. Stiles was younger by 5 years, maybe 6. Still had that eager look around the eyes that Alvord remembered having once. These days, Alvord figured his own eyes looked about as eager as a man facing a long walk through hell with holes in his boots. "Any excitement while I was making rounds?" Stiles asked. "Mrs. Henderson's cat got stuck up a tree again." "You get it down." "Cat got itself down. Always does." Stiles walked over to the other desk, the one that wobbled on 3 good legs and one that had been shimmed with folded newspaper for 2 years. He sat down careful, like a man who'd learned not to trust furniture. "Saw the train come through," he said. "You always see the train come through." "This time, I was thinking." "That's dangerous." Stiles grinned, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I was thinking about what that train carries. All them passengers with their money, their jewelry. Mail car full of letters with money inside. And that express car." Alvord looked at him. Really looked at him. "You feeling all right, Billy?" "Feel fine. Just wondering is all." "You ever wonder what's in that express car?" "Mail. Packages. Nothing that concerns us. Sometimes it's payroll money. For the mines down in Bisbee. Copper Queen Mine gets their payroll shipped by rail twice a month. I heard tell it can be a powerful lot of money." Alvord set down his pencil. He'd been working on the monthly report, but the numbers had started swimming together an hour ago. Same numbers every month, anyway. Number of arrests, usually none. Number of disturbances, maybe one or two drunks. Number of complaints, more than he wanted to count, mostly about things he couldn't do nothing about. "Billy," he said, "what exactly are you getting at?" "Nothing. Just making conversation." Conversation about payroll money and express cars. Man can't help what he thinks about. Alvord studied his deputy's face. Stiles had been acting peculiar for a week now, asking odd questions, talking about money more than usual. Yesterday, he'd mentioned seeing a new saddle in the general store, saying how a man could buy a lot of things if he had the money. "You having money troubles?" Alvord asked. "Same money troubles as everyone else wearing a badge in Arizona territory. Trying to live on what they pay us. It's honest work. Honest don't buy much." The afternoon light was fading now, turning the dust motes from gold to gray. Soon they'd disappear altogether, same as the day, same as most everything else that passed through this country. "You know what I made last month?" Stiles asked. "Same as me. $30. "You know what I spent last month?" Alvord waited. $32.15. "Had to borrow money from my sister in Tucson just to eat the last week." "Things will pick up." "When? When will they pick up, Burt? When will this job pay enough for a man to live decent?" Alvord didn't have an answer for that. The territory was growing, but slowly. Towns like Wilcox were still just dots on the map, places for the train to stop and take on water. The real money was in California or back east. Out here, a man made do or moved on. "There's other work," Alvord said. "Like what?" "Punching cattle for $20 a month. Digging in the mines for the same? At least wearing a badge, a man gets some respect." "Respect don't spend." "No, it don't." Outside, the whistle sounded. 5:15, right on schedule. The Southern Pacific, heading west with whatever cargo it carried, whatever secrets it kept locked in that express car. Both men listened as the train passed, the sound of steel on steel gradually fading until there was nothing left but the usual desert quiet. Somewhere a cricket started up, then another. Night sounds beginning. "I better lock up," Alvord said. "Yeah," Stiles said, but he didn't move from his chair. "Burt?" "What?" "You ever think about what it would be like? Having real money, I mean." Alvord looked at his deputy for a long moment. In the fading light, Stiles looked older somehow. Or maybe hungrier. "Every man thinks about it," Alvord said finally. "And what do you think?" "I think thinking about it and doing something about it are two different things entirely." Stiles nodded, but he was still looking out the window where the train had disappeared. "Yeah," he said. "I suppose they are." But the way he said it made Alvord wonder if Billy Stiles was really sure about that distinction. And that wondering stayed with him as he locked up the office and walked through the gathering darkness towards supper, beef stew, and another night in a town where the most exciting thing that happened was a cat getting stuck in a tree. The dust had settled for the day, but Alvord had a feeling it would be stirring again real soon. Chapter 2. Billy Stiles showed up the next morning with 2 cups of coffee and a newspaper he'd already read cover to cover. The coffee was still hot, which meant he'd walked fast from the hotel, probably thinking the whole way. "Figured you might want some," he said, setting 1 cup on Alvord's desk. Alvord tasted it. Good coffee. Not the usual chicory water they served most places in town. "This cost you extra." "Man's got to live a little." "With what money?" "Found a dime on the street yesterday." "Lucky day." Alvord doubted that, but he didn't say so. He opened the newspaper to the front page while Stiles settled into his wobbly chair. The headlines were the usual mix of territorial politics and mining news. Silver prices down. Copper holding steady. Apache troubles over in New Mexico, but nothing closer to home. Page 3, Stiles said. What's on page 3? Just read page 3. Alvord turned the pages, found what Stiles was talking about. Small item, maybe 6 lines of type. The Southern Pacific Railroad reports record shipments of currency through Arizona Territory this quarter. Company officials cite increased mining activity in Bisbee and other copper camps as the primary cause of larger than usual payroll transfers. So they're moving more money than usual. Billy, what's got into you? Yesterday, you're asking about express cars. Today, you're having me read about railroad money. Can't a man take an interest in current events? Alvord folded the paper and set it aside. Outside, the morning was already heating up. By noon, it would be hot enough to cook meat on a saddle horn. Another day in paradise. You know what I was thinking about last night? Stiles asked. Probably the same thing you've been thinking about all week. I was thinking about Sam Ketchum. Now that got Alvord's attention. Sam Ketchum and his brother Tom had been raising hell across New Mexico and Arizona for 2 years, robbing trains and banks, staying ahead of every posse sent after them. Word was, they'd pulled in more money in 6 months than most men saw in a lifetime. What about Sam Ketchum? He started out honest. Worked cattle, did some mining. But honest work don't pay, so he tried something else. Something else got him shot to pieces down in Lordsburg last month. But not before he made himself rich. Alvord leaned back in his chair, studied his deputy's face. Billy, you're starting to worry me. Why? Because I'm tired of being poor. Because you're talking like a man who's fixing to do something stupid. Stiles was quiet for a moment, drinking his coffee, looking out the window at the empty street. A dust devil spun itself to death near the general store. 2 dogs sniffed at something in the shade of the barber shop. Regular morning activity in a town that didn't have much activity any time of day. Burt, how long you been wearing that badge? 5 years. How much money you saved up in 5 years? That's my business. I'll tell you how much I saved up. $17. $17 in 3 years of law work. You know what my brother made last month, working in a bank in Tucson? I don't want to know. $68. $68 for sitting behind a desk, counting other people's money. Your brother's got education. My brother's got luck. Right place, right time, right connections. We got the wrong place, wrong time, and the only connections we got are to a county that can barely afford to pay us. A wagon rolled past outside, heading toward the railroad station. Driver was somebody Alvord didn't recognize, which wasn't unusual. A lot of strangers passed through Wilcox, riding the train or driving freight. Most of them had more money in their pockets than he did. Billy, he said, what exactly are you proposing? I'm not proposing anything. Just talking. Talk like that can get a man in trouble. What kind of trouble? Trouble like being poor. Trouble like getting old in a job that don't pay enough to live on. Stiles stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the street where nothing much was happening. You know what I heard yesterday? I'm sure you're going to tell me. I heard the Copper Queen mine in Bisbee is getting a payroll shipment next week. Big shipment. End of the month. They got to pay all their workers, plus they're opening a new shaft and hiring more men. Where'd you hear that? Man talks to people, he learns things. What kind of people? The kind that know about mine payrolls. Alvord set down his coffee cup harder than necessary. Billy, you better tell me straight what's on your mind. Stiles turned from the window. You ever notice how that train slows down when it comes through town? Has to take water, check the brakes, make sure everything's working for the long haul to California. So when a train slows down, it becomes vulnerable. Especially if a man knew when it was carrying something worth taking. There it was. Out in the open now, no more dancing around the subject. Alvord felt something cold settle in his stomach, even though the morning was already warm. You're talking about robbing the train. I'm talking about taking what we deserve. What any man deserves who's willing to work for it. That's not work, Billy. That's crime. What's crime? Taking money from men who got more than they know what to do with. Or letting your family go hungry while you wear a badge and pretend you're making a difference in the world. We are making a difference. What difference? When's the last time we arrested anybody for something that mattered? When's the last time this badge meant anything more than $30 a month and the right to get shot at by drunks? Stiles sat back down, leaned forward across his desk. Burt, I know you. I know you think about things, same as me. I know you see that train come through every day and wonder what it would be like to have enough money to ride it somewhere else. Thinking and doing are different things. Are they? Because seems to me, a man who thinks long enough about something eventually finds a way to make it happen. The morning train whistle sounded in the distance. Early today, or maybe Alvord's internal clock was running slow. Time seemed to be moving different since this conversation started. Even if a man was crazy enough to try something like that, Alvord said, it wouldn't be just the two of us. Would need more men. Would need planning. Would need luck. Men can be found. Planning can be done. And luck. Stiles grinned. Well, seems to me we're due for some luck. The train was getting closer now. Alvord could feel the vibration in the floorboards, hear the chuff of the engine working hard across the desert. In a few minutes it would pull into the station, take on water, discharge passengers, pick up new ones, and roll on toward its destination. Same as always. But something had changed in the last few minutes. Some line had been crossed, some door opened that couldn't be closed again. You've been thinking about this for a while, Alvord said. Long enough to know it could work. And if it doesn't work, if we get caught, then we get caught trying to make something of ourselves instead of sitting in this office for the next 20 years, watching dust settle and pretending we matter. The train pulled into the station with a hiss of steam and a squeal of brakes. Through the window, Alvord could see passengers getting off, stretching their legs, looking around at a town they'd probably forget before they reached the next stop. I need time to think, Alvord said. Don't think too long, Stiles said. Opportunity, don't wait around forever. But Alvord was already thinking, had been thinking since the moment Stiles said the word vulnerable. And what scared him most wasn't that the idea was crazy. What scared him was how much sense it made. Chapter 3. Alvord didn't sleep much that night. He lay in his narrow bed at the boarding house, listening to the sounds of the desert settling into darkness and thinking about trains. About money. About the difference between thinking and doing, which seemed smaller now than it had yesterday morning. When he finally gave up on sleep and walked to the jailhouse, the sun was just clearing the mountains to the east. Stiles was already there, sitting on the front steps with a cup of coffee balanced on his knee. You're early, Alvord said. Couldn't sleep. Makes two of us. They went inside without saying anything more about it. Alvord lit the lamp, even though there was enough morning light coming through the windows. Something about the routine of it felt necessary, like holding on to normal things while thinking about abnormal ones. Billy. Yeah. That train. The one with the payroll money. When's it supposed to come through? Stiles looked up from the papers he was shuffling. Week from Friday. September 8th. You seem pretty sure about that. Man I talked to was sure about it. What man? Fellow who works at the freight office. Says, the Copper Queen always gets their payroll shipments the second Friday of the month. Regular as clockwork. Alvord poured himself coffee from the pot Styles had made. It was strong enough to float a horseshoe, the way he liked it when he needed to think clear. This fellow have a name? He might. Billy. All right. Name's Morrison. Charlie Morrison. Works nights at the freight office, drinks days at the arcade saloon. Talks too much when he drinks, but what he says is reliable. How do you know it's reliable? Because I checked. Asked around, careful like. Everything Morrison told me matches up with what other people know about railroad schedules. Alvord walked to the window, looked out at the empty street. In a few hours, it would be full of people doing the same things they did every day. Mrs. Henderson would sweep her front porch. The barber would set up his chair outside his shop. The general store would open, and folks would come by to buy the same things they bought every week. You know what you're asking me to do, he said. I'm not asking you to do anything. I'm just sharing information. Information about robbing trains. Information about opportunities. The morning train came through right on schedule. Alvord watched it slow for the water stop, saw the engineer climb down to check something on the wheels, saw passengers stretch their legs on the platform. The whole operation took maybe 10 minutes. Then the whistle blew, steam hissed, and the train rolled on toward California. 10 minutes, Alvord said. What? They stopped for 10 minutes. Every day, same routine. More or less. Which is it? More or less. Styles came to stand beside him at the window. Sometimes it's 8 minutes, sometimes 12. Depends on how much water they need, whether there's any problems with the engine. What about the express car? What about it? Where does it sit in the line of cars? Usually third car back from the engine, after the coal tender and the mail car. Alvord studied the railroad tracks that ran straight as a ruler through the middle of town. East toward Texas, west toward California. Simple iron rails that carried complicated cargo. You've been watching pretty close, he said. Man notices things. Some things a man's better off not noticing. Maybe. Or maybe some things a man's better off paying attention to. They stood there, watching the last car disappear around a bend in the distance. When the train was gone, the town seemed even quieter than usual. Like something important had left and might not come back. Billy, if a man was crazy enough to try something like this, how would he do it? Hypothetically. Hypothetically. Styles walked back to his desk, sat down, looked at his hands for a moment. Hypothetically, a man would need to stop the train somewhere between stations. Somewhere isolated. How? Block the tracks, maybe. Or tamper with them, so the engineer has to slow down. That could derail the whole train. Kill people. Not if it was done right. Just enough to make them stop and see what's wrong. Alvord thought about that. Where? Between here and Fairbank. There's a stretch of track about 5 miles east where it runs through a canyon. No houses, no roads. Just desert and rocks. You've been out there. I've been lots of places. When? Yesterday. Rode out to look around. So it wasn't hypothetical anymore. Hadn't been for a while, probably. Styles had been planning this thing, whether Alvord went along with it or not. What did you see? I saw a place where the track curves around a big rock formation. Train has to slow down for the curve anyway. Good place to stop a train without hurting anybody. Good place to get shot too if things go wrong. Things don't have to go wrong. They usually do. Styles leaned forward. Burt, you know what the difference is between us and Sam Ketchum? Sam Ketchum's dead. Sam Ketchum was stupid. Loud, careless, and stupid. Hit trains in broad daylight, shot up half the countryside, made enemies of everybody from here to El Paso. And that makes us smarter. We're already smarter. We know this country. We know the train schedules. We know when they're carrying money and when they're not. Most important, we know how to keep our mouths shut. A wagon rolled down the street outside, loaded with supplies for one of the local ranches. The driver tipped his hat toward the jailhouse window. Alvord waved back, wondering what the man would think if he knew what the local deputies were discussing. "There's something else," Stiles said. "What?" "We're the law. Who's going to suspect the law?" That stopped Alvord cold. He hadn't thought about it that way, but Stiles was right. After a train robbery, the first thing the railroad would do is ask for help from local law enforcement. Ask them to form a posse, investigate, track down the criminals. Jesus, Billy. What? You're talking about investigating our own crime. I'm talking about being smart. About thinking ahead. That's not being smart. That's being. Alvord couldn't finish the sentence. What? What is it? I don't know. Something worse than stupid. But even as he said it, Alvord could see the beauty of the plan. The perfect irony of it. Deputies by day, outlaws by night, then deputies again the next morning, leading the hunt for themselves. It could work, he said almost to himself. It will work. How much money are we talking about? Morrison says the Copper Queen payroll runs between $20,000 and $30,000. $30,000. Alvord tried to imagine that much money, couldn't quite do it. More than he'd make in 20 years wearing a badge. More than most men saw in a lifetime. Split how many ways? Depends on how many men we need. We'd need more than just us two. I know some people. What kind of people? The kind that know how to keep quiet and do what needs doing. Alvord walked back to the window, looked out at the railroad tracks gleaming in the morning sun. Somewhere out there, east of town, was a curve in the tracks where a train could be stopped. Where a fortune could be taken. Where two deputies could become something else entirely. I need to see this place, he said. When? This afternoon. After we lock up. Stiles smiled for the first time in days. I'll bring the horses. Billy. Yeah. We're just looking. Just seeing what's out there. Sure, Burt. Just looking. But they both knew that looking was just another way of deciding. And the decision was already half made. Chapter 4. The ride out to the canyon had settled it. Alvord spent 2 hours looking at that curve in the tracks, studying the rock formations, timing how long it took sound to carry across the desert, and he knew Stiles was right. It could work. Now, 3 days later, he was sitting in Morales' cantina watching a man named Juan Yoas nurse a glass of tequila and wondering if he'd lost his mind. That's him, Stiles said quietly. They call him Bravo Juan. Alvord studied the man across the smoky room. Maybe 40 years old, lean as a whip with scars on his knuckles and a way of sitting that suggested he could move fast when he needed to. He wore a gun low on his hip, tied down like a man who used it for more than show. What's his story? Rode with some of the Apache fighters down in Sonora. Did some work for the rurales when they needed someone who could track. Word is he's good with a gun and better at staying quiet. Word from who? People who know. The cantina was half full of the usual evening crowd. Miners from the local claims, ranch hands from the spreads east of town, a few drifters passing through on their way to somewhere else. Nobody paid much attention to two deputies having a drink after work. Bravo Juan looked up, caught Alvord watching him, nodded slightly. His eyes were the color of desert stone and just about as warm. He knows why we're here, Alvord said. I might have mentioned we wanted to talk. About what? Business opportunities. A Mexican boy brought them another round of beer. The kid couldn't have been more than 15, but he moved through the cantina like he'd been doing it for years. Probably had been. Billy, you sure about this man? Sure as I can be without knowing him personal. That's not very sure. You got a better idea how to find reliable help. Alvord didn't. That was the problem with this whole business. The kind of men you needed for train robbery weren't the kind who advertised their services in the newspaper. Bravo Juan finished his tequila, stood up, walked over to their table. He moved quiet for a big man, boots hardly making a sound on the wooden floor. Deputy Alvord. Deputy Stiles. Juan, Stiles said. Sit down. Have a drink. I have had enough to drink. But he sat anyway, pulling the chair around so his back wasn't to the room. Your friend wishes to speak with me about business, yes? That's right, Alvord said. What kind of business does a deputy sheriff have with a man like me? The kind that pays well. Many things pay well. Not all of them are wise. Alvord looked around the cantina. The nearest table was occupied by two old-timers arguing about a poker game from 1887. Nobody else was close enough to hear conversation over the guitar music coming from the corner. We're thinking about a job, he said. Something that would require extra hands. What kind of job? The kind that involves the railroad. Bravo Juan was quiet for a moment, his stone-colored eyes moving between Alvord and Stiles. The railroad has many jobs. Laying track, loading freight, selling tickets. Not that kind of job. Ah. Juan leaned back in his chair. The other kind. You interested? That depends. On many things. Such as? How much money? How much risk? How many men hang if something goes wrong? Fair questions, Stiles said. The money would be substantial. $5,000, maybe more. Each. Each. That got Juan's attention. Alvord could see it in the way his eyes sharpened, even though his face didn't change expression. And the risk? Manageable, Alvord said. If it's done right. There's no such thing as manageable risk when it comes to robbing trains. There is only dead and not dead. You've done this before, Stiles said. I have done many things. Some I am proud of, some I am not. What makes you think I would be interested in this particular thing? Alvord studied the man's face. Hard to read, like leather that had been worked by sun and wind until it was tough as iron. But there was something in his eyes that suggested he was listening. Because you're here, Alvord said. Because you came over to talk instead of walking out when you heard what we wanted. Perhaps I am curious. Perhaps you need money. All men need money. Some need it more than others. Juan was quiet again, looking at his hands. They were scarred from hard work, with old rope burns across the palms. Working man's hands, but the gun at his hip suggested he did more than rope cattle for a living. This railroad job, he said finally. When? Soon. Week from Friday. The Southern Pacific. That's right. Which train? The evening westbound. The one that carries mine payrolls. Juan nodded slowly. I know this train. It stops in Wilcox for water. You've been watching it. A man notices things, especially when those things might be useful someday. The guitar player in the corner started a new song, something slow and mournful. A couple of the miners began singing along in voices roughened by whiskey and desert dust. So you're interested, Stiles said. I did not say that. You didn't say you weren't. There are other considerations. This is not something two men can do alone. We know that, Alvord said. That's why we're talking to you. You will need at least 4 men. Maybe 5. You know people. I might know 1 or 2. But good men cost extra. How much extra? Depends on the man. Alvord took a drink of his beer, thinking. More men meant smaller shares, but it also meant a better chance of success. And a better chance of keeping everyone alive. There's something else you should know, he said. What? After it's done, we'll be the ones investigating the crime. Juan stared at him for a moment, then started to laugh. Not loud, just a quiet chuckle that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. Dios mío. You want to rob the train, and then catch yourselves. Something like that. That is either very smart or very crazy. Maybe both. Yes, Juan said. Maybe both. He stood up, dropped a coin on the table for his tequila. I will think about this. And I will ask around, see who might be available for such work. How long do you need? 2 days. 3 at most. Where do we meet? Here. Same time, same table. But next time, we talk outside. Too many ears in places like this. He started to walk away, then turned back. Deputy Alvord. Yeah. This job. It is not about the money for you, is it? The question caught Alvord off guard. What do you mean? I mean, you are not poor enough to risk hanging just for money. There is something else. Alvord thought about it. Maybe I'm just tired of being ordinary. Juan nodded. Yes. That is a dangerous thing to be tired of. He walked away, moving through the cantina like smoke, and disappeared into the night. Alvord sat there for a while, finishing his beer and thinking about what the man had said. Tired of being ordinary. Maybe that was it. Maybe that was what this was really about. Well? Stiles asked. He's in. Or he will be once he thinks it through. How can you tell? Because he's right. I'm not poor enough to risk hanging just for money. So why are we doing it? Alvord looked around the cantina, at the miners and drifters and working men drinking away another day. Good men, most of them, but ordinary. Men who would live ordinary lives and die ordinary deaths and be forgotten a week after the dirt was shoveled over their coffins. Because, he said, sometimes a man has to do something extraordinary, even if it kills him. Chapter 5. 2 nights later, Alvord found himself riding through desert darkness toward a line shack 15 miles south of town. Stiles rode beside him, quiet as the grave, and somewhere behind them Bravo Juan followed on a paint horse that moved like a ghost across the hardpan. You sure about this man? Alvord asked for the 3rd time since they'd left town. Juan says he's reliable. Juan barely knows us. How's he know who's reliable? Same way we know Juan's reliable, I guess. We don't know Juan's reliable. Too late to worry about it now. The shack appeared ahead of them, a dark square against darker hills. No light showed in the windows, but smoke rose from the chimney, gray against the star-filled sky. Someone was home, waiting. They tied their horses to a dead mesquite tree and walked to the door. Juan knocked twice, paused, knocked once more. A voice called from inside. It's open. The man sitting at the rough wooden table had 2 fingers missing from his left hand. The stumps were old wounds, healed clean, but the way he held his coffee cup suggested he still felt the phantom pain from time to time. Jack Dunlap, he said, not getting up. Most folks call me 3-fingered Jack, on account of the obvious. He was maybe 50, with gray in his beard and lines around his eyes that spoke of too much sun and too little sleep. His gun hung from a peg on the wall, but there was a knife on the table within easy reach of his right hand. Deputies, he said, looking at their badges. Ain't often I entertain the law in my home. Ain't often we come calling on men like you, Alvord said. Men like me? What kind of man is that? The kind that might be interested in making some money. Money's always interesting. Depends on what a man has to do to earn it. Juan closed the door behind them, took a chair without being asked. The shack was smaller than it looked from outside, with just enough room for a table, 2 bunks, and a wood stove that threw more heat than light. Jack here has experience with railroads, Juan said. What kind of experience? Dunlap held up his damaged hand. The kind that leaves marks. Accident? No accident. Train guard caught me with my hand where it didn't belong. Had a cleaver, and he knew how to use it. Stiles looked uncomfortable. When was this? 3 years back. Down in New Mexico. I was young and stupid, thought I could crack a safe by myself. What happened? What happened is I learned that safes don't crack easy, and train guards don't ask questions before they start swinging. Dunlap flexed his remaining fingers. But I also learned a few things about how railroad cars are built, where they keep the strong boxes, and how long it takes for help to come when someone pulls that emergency cord. Alvord walked to the single window, looked out at the desert. Nothing moved, except the wind stirring the sage. Good place for a private conversation. Juan says you might be interested in another railroad job. Juan says a lot of things. This one would be different. How different? Better planned. More men. Better odds. And better pay. Much better pay. Dunlap poured coffee from a dented pot, offered cups to the others. The coffee was strong enough to dissolve horseshoes, but it was hot and it was real. How much better? $5,000, Stiles said. Each. Each. Dunlap whistled low. That's serious money. It's serious work. What's the target? Southern Pacific. The evening westbound that carries mine payrolls. Which car? Express car. Third back from the engine. Express cars got guards. We know. Good guards. Men who get paid to shoot first and ask questions later. We've thought about that. Dunlap leaned back in his chair, studying their faces. You thought about it, or you got a plan for dealing with it? We got a plan, Alvord said. Care to share? Stop the train before it gets to the station. Hit it where there's no help coming. How do you stop a train? Block the tracks. Make them think there's trouble ahead. That might work. Dunlap sipped his coffee. Might get you all killed too. Everything might get you killed, Juan said. The trick is not to let it. Easy to say. Harder to do. A coyote called somewhere in the distance, lonesome and wild. The sound seemed to remind all of them how far they were from town, from law, from the safe world where men wore badges and followed rules. Tell me about the timing, Dunlap said. Week from Friday. Train comes through Wilcox at 5:15, stops for water, rolls on toward California. We hit it about 10 miles west of town. That's open country. That's the idea. Hard to get away across open country. We know the country, Stiles said. We know where to go. You know where to hide the money. We'll figure that out. You better figure it out before you steal it. Money don't do much good if you can't spend it. Dunlap stood up, walked to the stove, warmed his hands over the heat. The missing fingers made his hands look like broken tools, but they moved sure and steady. There's something else you need to think about, he said. What? After you rob that train, every lawman in Arizona territory is going to be looking for you. Railroads got influence, got money to offer rewards. They don't like being robbed. We've thought about that too. Have you? Because thinking about it and being ready for it are two different things. Alvord exchanged glances with Stiles. What do you mean? I mean when the posses start forming, when the wanted posters go up, when every bounty hunter between here and Texas comes looking for easy money, you better have more than good intentions to keep you alive. We'll manage. Famous last words. Dunlap returned to his chair. But I'll say this. If you can pull it off, it'd be something worth doing. Railroads got more money than they know what to do with. And they didn't get it by being generous to working folks. So you're interested? I'm interested. But I got conditions. Such as? First, I want to see the spot where you plan to stop the train. Want to walk the ground, check the angles, make sure it's not a death trap. Fair enough. Second, I want to know exactly how many men we're talking about. No surprises. 4 men total. The 3 of us plus 1 more. Who's the 4th? Still working on that. Work faster. Man likes to know who he's riding with. Anything else? Yeah. After the job's done, we split the money and go our separate ways. No reunions, no reminiscing about old times. Clean break. Why? Because men who stay together after jobs like this usually end up hanging together. And I got no desire to dance at the end of a rope. He passed around a bottle of whiskey that had appeared from somewhere. Each man took a drink, passed it on. The ritual seemed to seal something between them. One more thing, Dunlap said. What? This job goes bad, every man looks out for himself. No heroics, no trying to save anybody else. Understood. They all nodded. It was the kind of understanding that came natural to men who lived outside the law. Trust only went so far, and survival came first. All right then, Dunlap said. When do we ride out to look at this spot? Tomorrow night, Alvord said. After dark. I'll be ready. As they prepared to leave, Dunlap caught Alvord's arm. Deputy, he said quietly. What? That badge you're wearing. You plan to keep wearing it after this job. Why? Because a man can't serve 2 masters. Not for long. Eventually, he's got to choose which side of the law he's on. Alvord looked down at the silver star pinned to his vest. He'd worn it for 5 years, taken pride in it, tried to be the kind of lawman people could respect. Maybe, he said. Maybe it's time to choose. Outside, riding back toward town under a sky full of stars, Giles asked, What do you think? I think we just crossed a line we can't uncross. You having second thoughts? Alvord considered that. No, he said finally. I'm having first thoughts. About a lot of things. But he touched the badge on his chest and wondered how much longer he'd be wearing it. Chapter 6. Charlie Morrison was drunk again, which was exactly what Alvord had been counting on. The freight office clerk sat hunched over his beer at the arcade saloon, talking to anyone who'd listen about the important cargo that passed through his hands. Railroad business, Morrison was saying to the bartender, that's where the real money is. Not like working cattle or digging holes in the ground. Alvord took the stool next to him, ordered whiskey. Evening, Charlie. Deputy Alvord. Buy you a drink. Already got one. Morrison was a thin man with thinning hair and thick spectacles that made his eyes look bigger than they were. He'd worked for the Southern Pacific for 8 years, long enough to know their business, but not long enough to keep his mouth shut about it. Charlie here was just telling me about railroad cargo, the bartender said. Nothing confidential, Morrison added quickly. Just general business talk. Sure, Alvord said. Man's got to talk about something. Morrison relaxed. Deputies didn't usually worry about railroad gossip, and Alvord had always been friendly enough. No reason to think tonight was different. Take that train comes through Friday evenings, Morrison said. Carries more valuable cargo in one trip than most folks see in a year. That right. Mail contracts, mine payrolls, bank transfers. Sometimes there's $20,000–$30,000 in that express car. The bartender whistled. That's a lot of money. More than a lot. That's fortune money. Morrison drained his beer, gestured for another. Course, it's locked up tight. Strongbox in the express car, armed guard, whole 9 yards. What kind of strongbox? Alvord asked, trying to sound casual. Mosler safe. Same kind they use in banks back east. Take dynamite to open one of them. Or the combination. Yeah, but only the express company knows the combination. Guard don't even know it. Has to wait till they reach destination to get it opened. Morrison leaned closer, lowered his voice like he was sharing state secrets. But I'll tell you something else. That safe ain't the only thing they got on that train. What do you mean? Sometimes they carry cash in regular luggage too. Emergency funds, petty cash for the mining offices. Stuff that don't rate the big safe treatment. How much stuff? Depends. Could be a few hundred, could be a few thousand. All depends on what's happening at the mines. Alvord sipped his whiskey, thinking. The Mosler safe would be the big prize, but smaller amounts scattered around the express car might be easier targets. Might be enough to make the whole job worthwhile, even if they couldn't crack the main strongbox. This Friday's train, he said. You happen to know what it's carrying? Morrison looked around, made sure nobody was listening except the bartender, who'd heard it all before anyway. Copper Queen payroll, he said quietly. End of month, they got to pay everybody. Miners, office workers, supply contractors. Word is, it's a big one this time. How big? 30,000, maybe more. All in the strongbox, plus maybe 5,000 in smaller bills for incidental expenses. $35,000. Alvord tried to picture that much money, couldn't quite do it. Split 4 ways, it would still be more than he'd make in 10 years wearing a badge. Guard always ride the same car, he asked. Express car, yeah. Usually just one man, but he's armed and he knows his business. What's his business? Shooting people who try to rob trains. Morrison laughed at his own joke, but Alvord didn't find it particularly funny. A professional guard would be different from local law. Trained, experienced, probably wouldn't hesitate to kill if he thought his cargo was threatened. This guard got a name. Changes every trip. Railroad don't like using the same man too regular. Makes it harder for robbers to know what they're up against. Makes sense. Course, don't matter much what guard they use. Train robbery's a young man's game, and most young men ain't stupid enough to try it anymore. Too many ways to get killed. The bartender refilled Morrison's beer, gave Alvord a questioning look. Alvord shook his head. He'd heard enough, and too much whiskey might make him ask questions that would be remembered later. Well, Charlie, I better head home. Long day tomorrow. Sure thing, Deputy. Always a pleasure talking with a fellow who appreciates the finer points of railroad business. Alvord left money on the bar, walked out into the desert night. The air was cooler now, with a breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Somewhere to the west, lightning flickered against the mountains, too far away to hear the thunder. He found Stiles waiting at the jailhouse, sitting in the dark with his feet up on his desk. Learn anything interesting? Stiles asked. Mosler safe. Same kind they use in banks. That's what I was afraid of. But there's other money too. Smaller amounts, easier to get at. How much smaller? Maybe 5,000, over and above the strongbox. Still not bad money. Alvord lit the lamp, sat down at his own desk. The office looked different somehow, like he was seeing it through different eyes. The wanted posters on the wall, the gun rack, the keys hanging from their hooks. All the tools of law enforcement. And here he was planning to break every law in the book. Billy, you ever think about what we're really doing here? Making ourselves rich. Besides that, what else is there? We're crossing over. Becoming the kind of men we used to arrest. Styles was quiet for a moment. You having doubts? No. Just thinking about what it means. It means we're taking control of our lives instead of letting other people decide what we're worth. It means we're becoming criminals. So, half the rich men in this territory got their money by breaking somebody else's rules. At least we're being honest about it. Lightning flashed again, closer this time. Thunder rolled across the desert like distant cannon fire. Storm coming in from the west. Probably hit town before morning. Jack wants to see the spot tomorrow night, Alvord said. He'll approve. It's a good spot. Hope so. Man with 2 fingers missing might know something about bad spots. He'll be fine with it. Question is, are we going to be fine with him? Alvord thought about 3-fingered Jack Dunlap, about the way he'd handled that knife, about the hard look in his eyes when he talked about survival. Not the kind of man you'd want as an enemy. We'll be fine as long as everybody gets their fair share. And if they don't, then we'll find out what kind of men we really are. The storm was getting closer now. Alvord could feel the electricity in the air, making his skin prickle. Change coming, whether they were ready for it or not. $35,000, Styles said. That's what Morrison thinks. Morrison's usually right about these things. Usually. They sat in the lamplight, listening to thunder roll across the desert, each man thinking about money and what it might cost to get it. Outside, the first fat raindrops began hitting the dust in the street, raising the smell of wet earth and new possibilities. Billy. Yeah. After this is over, things are going to be different. That's the idea. I mean between us. Between us and everybody else. We won't be the same people. Good. I'm tired of being the same people. Lightning illuminated the window, showing the empty street, the railroad tracks gleaming in the rain, the vast desert stretching away toward mountains and mystery. Storm's here, Alvord said. About time. But Alvord wasn't talking about the weather, and somehow he figured Styles knew that. The real storm was still coming, still building somewhere out there in the darkness. And when it hit, it would change everything. Chapter 7. The hardware store closed at 6, but Tom Brennan stayed late to work on the books. Alvord knew this because Tom had complained about it often enough at the barber shop. Always behind on his paperwork, always trying to make the numbers add up to something that made sense. Which was why Alvord found himself standing outside Brennan's hardware at 7:30 in the evening, watching Tom count screws and nails by lamplight. He knocked on the glass door. Tom looked up, squinted through his spectacles, recognized the badge, and came over to unlock the door. Evening, deputy. Store's closed, but if it's official business. Not official. Personal. Tom stepped aside to let him in. The store smelled of leather and oil, metal and wood shavings. Tools hung from pegs along the walls, and barrels of nails stood in neat rows down the center aisle. What can I do for you? Need some supplies. For a mining claim. Didn't know you had mining interests. Recent development. Me and a partner are looking at some property east of town. Tom nodded. Half the men in Cochise County had mining dreams. Most came to nothing, but they bought a lot of hardware chasing those dreams. What kind of supplies? Blasting powder. Fuse. Caps. Standard mining setup. Tom walked to the back of the store, Alvord following. The blasting supplies were kept in a separate room, with thick walls and a heavy door. Tom unlocked it with a key from his vest pocket. How much powder you thinking? 20 pounds should do it. For now. That's a fair amount for prospect work. We want to do it right. Tom pulled down a wooden crate, checked the label. This is good stuff. Giant powder, comes from California. Burns clean, doesn't leave much residue. How much? $2 a pound for the powder. 50 cents for the fuse, 25 cents each for the caps. Alvord did the math. $47.50. More than a month's wages, but he had money saved, and more important, he had a plan for getting a lot more. I'll take it. Tom began loading the supplies into a wooden box, handling each stick of dynamite like it might explode if he looked at it wrong. Which it might, if a man wasn't careful. You done much blasting before? Tom asked. Some. Army taught me a few things. That wasn't entirely true. The Army had taught him how to dig latrines and follow orders, but he'd watched enough mine work to know the basics of explosives. Well, be careful with this stuff. It's stable enough if you treat it right, but it don't forgive mistakes. I'll be careful. And keep it dry. Moisture gets into the powder, it won't burn right. Might not burn at all, or might burn when you don't want it to. Tom wrapped each stick individually in oiled paper, then packed them in sawdust inside the wooden box. The fuse went in a separate container, coiled neat and protected from dampness. Anything else? Heavy hammer. Something that could break rock. Mining work or railroad work? The question caught Alvord off guard. What do you mean? Hammer for breaking ore samples, or sledge for driving spikes. Different tools for different jobs. Mining work. Tom pulled down a 10-pound sledgehammer with a hickory handle. This'll break anything you're likely to find in these hills. That'll do. Tom wrapped the hammerhead in burlap, loaded everything into a canvas bag. $49 even. Alvord counted out the money, mostly silver dollars with a few bills. Tom made change from a cash box behind the counter, then locked the blasting room again. Good luck with your claim, he said. Thanks. Walking back toward the jailhouse, Alvord felt the weight of the canvas bag and wondered what Tom Brennan would think if he knew what the mining supplies were really for. Probably be horrified. Tom was a decent man, paid his taxes, went to church on Sundays. The kind of man who believed the law meant something. The kind of man Alvord used to be. Stiles was waiting in the office, cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up when Alvord came in with the bag. Get everything? 20 pounds of giant powder, fuse, caps, and a sledgehammer. That should do it. Alvord set the bag in the corner, away from the lamp. Even wrapped and packed careful, dynamite made him nervous. Too much potential for things to go wrong. Billy, you ever work with explosives? Some. Helped blast stumps on my uncle's farm back in Kansas. Stumps are different from railroad tracks. Explosives are explosives. The trick is using just enough to do the job without overdoing it. How much is enough? For railroad tracks, 3, maybe 4 sticks should do it. Enough to bend the rails, not enough to blow up the whole countryside. Alvord hoped Stiles was right. The plan depended on stopping the train, not destroying it. Too little powder, and the train might just keep going. Too much, and they could derail the whole thing, kill innocent people, bring down heat they didn't want. Where are we going to set the charges? Jack wants to see the spot first, remember? Tomorrow night. Right. Stiles finished cleaning his gun, checked the action, loaded the chambers. You nervous about this, Burt? About which part? All of it. The whole thing. Alvord thought about that. Was he nervous? Or was he something else, excited maybe? The kind of feeling a man got when he was about to do something that would change his life forever. Yeah, he said. I'm nervous. Good. Man who ain't nervous about a job like this is either stupid or crazy. Which are we? Probably both. They sat in the lamplight, not talking, each man thinking about what lay ahead. In 3 days they would use the supplies in that canvas bag to stop a train, rob a strongbox, and become the kind of men who appeared on wanted posters. Outside, a dog barked at something in the darkness. Night sounds of a quiet town where people locked their doors and trusted the law to keep them safe. Billy. Yeah. After this is done, we can't come back here. You know that, right? Why not? We'll be the ones investigating the crime. Maybe at first. But something like this, it draws attention. Federal marshals, railroad detectives, bounty hunters. Eventually, somebody's going to figure out it was an inside job. Stiles looked up from his gun. You think somebody's going to talk? I think $35,000 is enough to make people ask hard questions. And when they start asking, they're going to wonder how local deputies could be so bad at catching train robbers. So what are you saying? I'm saying we better have a plan for afterward. Where to go, how to disappear, how to start over somewhere else. I thought about that. Mexico, maybe. Or California. Mexico might be better. Harder for American law to reach us there. You really think it'll come to that? I think once we light that fuse tomorrow night, everything changes. And there's no going back. Stiles holstered his gun, stood up, walked to the window. The street outside was empty, except for a stray cat picking through garbage behind the general store. Burt? What? You having second thoughts? Alvord looked at the canvas bag in the corner, at the wanted posters on the wall, at the badge on his chest that felt heavier than it had that morning. No, he said. No second thoughts. But that wasn't entirely true. He was having thoughts, all right. About what it meant to cross certain lines. About what happened to men who stepped outside the law. About whether $35,000 was worth becoming the kind of person he'd spent 5 years trying to catch. The dynamite sat in the corner like a promise and a threat. Tomorrow night they would ride out to the canyon, show Jack Dunlap the spot where they planned to stop the train. If he approved, they would be committed. No more talking, no more planning. Just action and consequences. Better get some sleep, Alvord said. Big day tomorrow. Yeah. Big day. But neither man moved toward the door. They sat there in the lamplight, surrounded by the tools of their trade, both the legal kind and the other kind, and wondered what they were becoming. Chapter 8. September 8th dawned hot and still, the kind of day when heat rose off the desert floor like invisible fire, and the sun turned the sky white before noon. Alvord woke before the roosters started crowing, lay in his narrow bed at the boarding house, and listened to his own heartbeat. Tonight. He'd been thinking that word for a week now, but this morning it felt different. Heavier. Like something with weight and substance instead of just an idea floating around in his head. He dressed slow, taking time with each button, each bootlace. Mrs. Patterson would have breakfast ready downstairs, eggs and bacon if he was lucky, grits and coffee if he wasn't. Either way, it might be the last meal he ate as a deputy sheriff. The dining room was empty, except for a traveling salesman reading yesterday's newspaper and complaining about the heat to nobody in particular. Mrs. Patterson brought Alvord eggs and fried potatoes without being asked. You look peaked, she said. You feeling all right? Just tired. Well, you eat up. A man needs his strength in this weather. He ate because it was something to do with his hands, something to occupy his mind. The eggs tasted like nothing, but he cleaned the plate anyway. Waste not, want not, his mother used to say. Though she probably never imagined her son would be following that advice on the morning of his first train robbery. The walk to the jailhouse took longer than usual. Every person he passed on the street seemed to look at him different, like they could see what he was planning written on his face. Mrs. Henderson sweeping her porch. Tom Brennan opening his hardware store. The barber setting up his chair outside his shop. Good people. Honest people. The kind who trusted the law to protect them from men like the one Alvord was about to become. Stiles was already at the office, sitting at his desk with a cup of coffee gone cold and a newspaper he wasn't reading. He looked up when Alvord came in. Morning. Morning. Sleep all right? Like a baby. Liar. They both knew there hadn't been much sleeping done by either of them. Too much thinking, too much planning, too much weight pressing down on what this day meant. You check the weather? Stiles asked. Clear skies. No wind. Good night for it. If you can call any night good for something like this. Alvord poured himself coffee, sat down at his desk. The morning report lay there, waiting to be filled out. Same questions as always. Any arrests? Any disturbances? Any complaints? How about any plans to rob trains? Any schemes to steal $35,000? Any intentions to become fugitives from the very law you're sworn to uphold? Burt? What? You know we don't have to do this. Little late for that kind of talk, don't you think? Not too late. We could call it off. Tell Juan and Jack we changed our minds. And then what? Go back to making $30 a month? Pretend we never talked about it? Maybe. You really believe that? Stiles was quiet for a moment, staring at his hands. No. I don't think I could forget about $35,000. Not now that I know it's sitting there on that train. Neither could I. The morning dragged by slower than winter molasses. Every minute felt like an hour, every hour like a day. Alvord tried to read, tried to work on paperwork, tried to think about anything except what they were planning to do when the sun went down. Around noon, Charlie Morrison stopped by with a telegram from the county seat. Some bureaucrat wanting to know about jail expenses for the month. Morrison seemed nervous, fidgeting with his hat, not quite meeting Alvord's eyes. Something wrong, Charlie? No, sir. Nothing wrong. You seem a mite jumpy. Just the heat, I guess. Makes a man restless. After Morrison left, Stiles looked over at Alvord. Think he knows something? Like what? Like maybe he's been thinking about our conversation the other night. About train cargo and strongboxes. Charlie Morrison's too drunk most of the time to think about much of anything. Maybe. Or maybe he's sobered up enough to wonder why a deputy sheriff was asking so many questions about railroad money. That thought had occurred to Alvord too, but he'd pushed it aside. Too late to worry about loose ends now. Tonight, they would either pull off the robbery or they wouldn't. Either way, Charlie Morrison's suspicions wouldn't matter much. The afternoon brought more heat and no relief. By 3 o'clock, the air was shimmering like water, and even the dogs had given up moving around. Alvord sat in the jailhouse, sweating through his shirt, watching dust motes dance in the superheated air. Train comes through at 5:15, Stiles said. I know. We meet Juan and Jack at 6. I know. Ride out to the spot at 7. Billy, I know the schedule. Just making sure we're both thinking the same thing. We're thinking the same thing. Question is, are Juan and Jack thinking the same thing? That was the part that worried Alvord most. Not the robbery itself, but the other men they were depending on. Men they barely knew. Men whose loyalty extended only as far as their share of the money. They'll be there, Stiles said. How can you be sure? Because $35,000 is a powerful motivator. So is staying alive. They'll be there. At 4 o'clock, Alvord locked up the office and walked over to the barber shop. He needed a shave, but more than that, he needed to be around normal people doing normal things. Something to remind him what he was leaving behind. The barber was an old man named Webb, who'd been cutting hair in Cochise County since before there was a Cochise County. He stropped his razor with practiced efficiency, made small talk about the weather, the railroad, the price of beef. "Hear tell there's been train trouble over in New Mexico," Webb said, working up a lather. "What kind of trouble?" "Robbers. Hit the Santa Fe twice last month." "Catch them?" "Not yet. But they will. Railroad don't like losing money. They got long memories and deep pockets." Webb tilted Alvord's head back, began scraping away whiskers with smooth, sure strokes. The razor was sharp enough to shave a man without him feeling it, which seemed appropriate somehow. "Course, it takes a special kind of fool to rob trains these days," Webb continued. "Too many ways to get killed, not enough ways to get away clean." "You think so?" "I know so. Used to be a man could disappear into Indian country, live off the land till things cooled down. But the Indians are mostly gone now, and the law's got telegraphs and railroad detectives and all kinds of modern advantages." The barber finished shaving, wiped Alvord's face with a hot towel, slapped on bay rum that stung like fire. "Train robbing's a young man's game, and there ain't many young men stupid enough to try it anymore." Alvord paid for the shave, walked back onto the street. The sun was lower now, casting longer shadows, but the heat hadn't broken. Wouldn't break until well after dark, if then. 5:15. The evening train pulled into the station, right on schedule. Alvord watched it from the jailhouse window. The black locomotive, the tender, the mail car, the express car with its precious cargo. Passengers got off to stretch their legs. Conductors called out departure times. The engineer checked his pocket watch. Routine. Everything exactly as it had been every day for months. Except tonight would be different. Tonight, that same train would stop in a canyon 10 miles west of town. Tonight, 4 men with guns and dynamite would break open that express car and take everything inside. Tonight, Deputy Sheriff Burt Alvord would cross a line he'd never be able to uncross. The train pulled out of the station at 5:28, 13 minutes behind schedule. But it would make up time on the straightaway west of town. By 7 o'clock, it would be rolling through the canyon where Juan and Jack were already waiting. Alvord checked his gun, made sure it was loaded. Not because he planned to use it, but because some things were better to have and not need than to need and not have. "Ready?" Stiles asked. Alvord looked around the office one last time. At the wanted posters on the wall, the keys hanging from their hooks, the badge lying on his desk where he'd left it. Tomorrow, if things went right, there might be new wanted posters. With his face on them. "Ready," he said. But he wasn't sure if that was the truth or just something a man told himself when he was about to find out what he was really made of. Chapter 9. The canyon lay in darkness, cut deep into the desert floor like a wound that never healed. Alvord crouched behind a boulder the size of a small house, listening to the night sounds, owls calling, coyotes yipping in the distance, and underneath it all, the faint vibration of steel rails that meant the train was coming. 5 minutes, Juan whispered from somewhere to his left. Jack Dunlap was positioned across the tracks, invisible in the shadow of the rock walls. The dynamite charges were set, 3 sticks wired together and placed where the rails curved around the biggest outcropping. Not enough to derail the train, just enough to buckle the track and force a stop. Stiles lay flat on his belly 20 yards behind Alvord, rifle ready, covering their retreat route. Everything according to plan. The vibration in the rails grew stronger. Alvord pulled his bandana up over his nose, checked his gun one more time. His mouth was dry as alkali dust, and his heart was beating so loud he was sure the others could hear it. Then the headlight appeared around the bend, a white eye cutting through the darkness. The locomotive came into view, black smoke streaming behind it, sparks flying from the stack. Beautiful and terrible, like some great iron beast charging through the night. Alvord had seen this train hundreds of times, but never like this. Never as prey. The engine hit the curve, began to slow. The engineer would see the charges any second now, hit the brakes, bring the whole thing to a screaming halt. That was the theory, anyway. The headlights swept across the canyon walls, throwing wild shadows. The locomotive rounded the curve, and Alvord could see the engineer leaning out of the cab, checking the track ahead. Now, one said. The explosion lit up the canyon like daylight. Thunder rolled off the rock walls, echoing and re-echoing until it sounded like the world was coming apart. The locomotive's brakes screamed against steel wheels, throwing sparks in all directions. The train shuddered to a stop, hissing steam maybe 50 yards from the damaged track. Close enough. The plan was working. Alvord rose from behind his boulder, gun drawn, and started toward the express car. His legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else. This was it. No more thinking, no more planning. Just action. Express car, he shouted. Open up. The car's door was locked tight, steel reinforced, built to keep out exactly the kind of men who were trying to get in. A gun barrel appeared in the small window. Fire bloomed in the darkness, and a bullet whined off the rocks near Alvord's head. The express guard was awake and ready. You in the car? Juan called from the other side of the train. Throw out your gun and open the door. We don't want to kill anybody. The response was another gunshot, this one aimed at Juan's voice. The bullet sparked off metal somewhere in the darkness. Stubborn, Jack Dunlap said. He appeared near the express car door, carrying a stick of dynamite with a short fuse already lit. Last chance, he yelled. Open up, or we blow the door. Silence from inside the car. Jack tossed the dynamite against the door and ran. The explosion was smaller than the one that had stopped the train, but in the confined space it sounded like cannon fire. The door buckled, hung crooked on its hinges, but didn't give way entirely. Built solid, Jack said, breathing hard. Need more powder. No time, Alvord said. Passengers are getting restless. He could hear voices from the passenger cars, people shouting questions, wondering what was happening. Soon some brave soul would come forward to investigate, and brave souls with good intentions could complicate things fast. Stand back, one said. He'd retrieved the sledgehammer from their supplies, hefted it like it weighed nothing. Sometimes the old ways work best. He swung the hammer against the damaged door with all his strength. Metal screamed against metal, and the door sagged further. Another swing, and it gave way entirely, crashing to the floor of the express car. A man's voice called from inside, Stay back. I'm armed. So are we, Alvord said. And there's more of us. He could see into the car now. The express guard was an older man, maybe 50, with gray in his mustache, and steady hands on a shotgun. Professional. The kind who wouldn't give up easy. You boys better ride on, the guard said. This car's got nothing worth dying for. That's for us to decide, Juan said. Railroads got a long memory. They'll hunt you down, all of you. Let us worry about that. Stiles appeared at Alvord's shoulder. Company coming, he said quietly. Conductor and 2 passengers moving this way from the rear cars. Handle it, Alvord said. Stiles melted back into the darkness. Alvord heard him call out, Stay in your cars. Railroad business. Nobody gets hurt if you stay put. A gunshot echoed off the canyon walls. Then another. Alvord hoped Stiles wasn't shooting passengers, but there wasn't time to worry about it now. Guard, he called into the express car. You got a choice. Come out peaceful, or we come in shooting. Either way, we're getting what we came for. What you came for is locked up tight. Safe's got a time lock. Won't open till we reach California. We'll see about that. Juan was already climbing into the express car, gun drawn. The guard swung his shotgun toward him, but Jack Dunlap appeared at the other end of the car with a rifle pointed at the guard's back. Easy, Jack said. Nobody needs to die tonight. The guard looked from Juan to Jack, calculating odds. Smart man. He lowered the shotgun. Hands up, Alvord said, climbing into the car. Step away from that safe. The Mosler safe squatted in the corner like an iron toad, black and solid and impossible. But there were canvas mailbags scattered around the car, and a wooden strongbox that looked more promising. Jack watched the guard. Juan, help me with these bags. They worked fast, emptying the mailbags onto the floor. Letters, packages, legal documents, and underneath it all, bundles of currency held together with paper bands. Not the main payroll, but substantial money nonetheless. The wooden strongbox was locked, but not with anything like the safe's mechanism. Juan's knife blade jimmied the latch in 30 seconds. More money. Bills and silver coins, loose gemstones, what looked like a collection of gold watches. The petty cash and valuables that didn't rate the main safe. How much? Jack asked, still watching the guard. Couple thousand at least, Alvord said, stuffing bills into a canvas bag. Maybe more. Not 35,000, but not nothing either. More money than he'd ever seen in one place. What about the big safe? Juan asked. Alvord looked at the Mosler. Solid steel, combination lock probably weighing half a ton. They'd need professional safecrackers, and a lot more time to get into that thing. Leave it. We got enough. Enough to hang for, the guard said. Enough to live on, Alvord replied. Stiles appeared in the doorway. Time to go. Conductor's got a gun, and he's getting brave. Plus, I think I heard a whistle from back east. Might be another train. They climbed out of the express car, leaving the guard locked inside. The whole operation had taken maybe 10 minutes, but it felt like hours. Horses are this way, Juan said, leading them into the rocks. As they reached their mounts, Alvord looked back at the train. Steam still hissed from the locomotive, and he could see passengers pressed against the windows of the rear cars, trying to see what was happening. Tomorrow, there would be telegraphs sent, posses formed, rewards posted. The biggest manhunt in Arizona Territory history would be looking for 4 men who had just crossed the line from law-abiding to outlaw. Move, Jack hissed. They mounted up and rode hard into the darkness, the sound of their horses' hooves echoing off the canyon walls. Behind them, the train sat disabled but not destroyed, its cargo partially plundered, its schedule ruined. As they climbed out of the canyon onto the desert floor, Alvord felt something he hadn't expected. Not guilt, not fear, but a strange kind of freedom. For the first time in years, maybe the first time in his life, he'd done something that mattered. Something that would be remembered. The money weighed heavy in the canvas bag tied to his saddle horn. Heavy with possibility, heavy with consequence, heavy with the future. Chapter 10. They rode hard for 2 hours, putting distance between themselves and the canyon, before Juan finally called a halt. The spot he chose was a dry wash 20 miles northeast of the railroad, hidden from casual view by mesquite and palo verde trees. Horses need rest, he said, dismounting. And we need to talk. Alvord's legs were shaky when he climbed down. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving behind something that felt like exhaustion mixed with electric current. His hands trembled as he loosened his horse's cinch. Anybody hurt? Jack asked. Guard wing Stiles in the shoulder, Juan said. Nothing serious. Feels serious enough, Stiles said, but he was grinning. Blood had soaked through his shirt, but the wound looked clean. Let me see. Juan examined the bullet crease by moonlight. Flesh wound. You'll live. Good. Hate to get killed on my first train robbery. They watered the horses from their canteens, let them blow while the four men sat in a circle on the sandy ground. Nobody had spoken about the money yet, but the canvas bag sat in the middle of their group like a question that needed answering. "Well?" Jack said finally. Alvord opened the bag, began sorting the contents by lamplight. Bills in neat stacks, silver dollars that clinked when he moved them, jewelry that caught the flame and threw it back in colored sparks. "Count it," Juan said. Alvord counted. Twice to make sure. When he finished, he looked up at the others. $4,200. Plus maybe another $500 in jewelry and watches. "Split 4 ways, Stiles said. That's better than 1,000 each." "More than I've ever had at one time," Jack said. "More than any of us have had," Juan agreed. But Alvord could hear something in their voices. Satisfaction, yes, but also disappointment. 4,000 wasn't 35,000. It was good money, maybe life-changing money for men who'd been scratching by on $30 a month. But it wasn't retirement money. "What about the big safe?" Stiles asked. "What about it?" Jack replied. "Thing was locked up tighter than a banker's heart. Would have taken professional crackers and half the night to get into. So we just leave $30,000 sitting there? We leave $30,000 we couldn't get at anyway. Still rankles. Better to rankle with money in your pocket than to hang with empty pockets," Juan said. They divided the cash evenly, each man counting his share twice before tucking it away. The jewelry they decided to split later, after they had time to figure out what it was worth. "So what now?" Jack asked. "Now we go back to town," Alvord said. "Act normal. Tomorrow morning, when the railroad reports the robbery, we'll be the first ones they call. And we investigate our own crime. That's the idea." Jack shook his head. "Still think that's the craziest part of this whole business." "Crazy like a fox," Stiles said. "Who's going to suspect the men leading the investigation? Somebody, eventually. Smart men don't stay fooled forever." "Eventually's a long time," Alvord said. "Long enough to figure out our next move." "Next move?" Juan looked up from securing his share of the money. "I thought this was a one-time thing." "Maybe it was. Maybe it wasn't." "Burt," Stiles said, "what are you thinking?" "I'm thinking $4,000 don't last forever. I'm thinking that safe is still sitting on trains twice a month, carrying more money than we saw tonight." "You want to hit them again." "I want to think about it." Jack stood up, brushed sand off his pants. "Count me out of any future jobs. This was good money, clean work, nobody killed. But pushing luck is a fool's game." "Nobody's pushing anything yet," Alvord said. "Just thinking out loud." "Well, think quieter. Some thoughts are dangerous to share." They mounted up again, rode back toward town through the pre-dawn darkness. The sky was beginning to show gray in the east by the time they reached the outskirts of Wilcox. They split up there, each man taking a different route home. Alvord rode straight to the livery stable, unsaddled his horse, rubbed him down proper. The ostler was still asleep, wouldn't be around for another 2 hours. Plenty of time to make it look like the horse had been there all night. Walking back to the boarding house, Alvord felt the weight of money in his pockets differently than he'd expected. Heavier, somehow. Not just the physical weight, but the weight of what it meant. What it made him. He climbed the back stairs to his room, trying not to wake the other boarders. His hands were still shaking, but not from fear now. From something else. Excitement, maybe. Or the simple knowledge that he'd crossed a line and survived the crossing. In his room, he hid the money and a flour sack under his mattress, then lay down fully dressed to wait for morning. Sleep seemed impossible. Too much energy, too many thoughts racing through his head. Had they left any traces? Would the guard be able to identify them? How long before the railroad sent detectives? And underneath all those practical concerns, one question that surprised him with its intensity: when could they do it again? He must have dozed, because the next thing he knew, Mrs. Patterson was ringing the breakfast bell downstairs. Sunlight was streaming through his window, and somewhere in the distance he could hear the morning train pulling into the station. Right on schedule, as if nothing had happened. Alvord washed, shaved, put on a clean shirt. In the mirror, he looked for some sign of what he'd done, some mark that would tell the world he'd become an outlaw. But he looked the same as always. Maybe a little tired, maybe a little more alert around the eyes, but nothing that would make people stare. He pinned the badge to his shirt, checked his gun, walked downstairs to breakfast. Mrs. Patterson had made pancakes and bacon. He ate with appetite, surprised by how hungry he was. "Sleep well?" she asked. "Like a rock." "Good. A man needs his rest." The walk to the jailhouse felt different. Every person he passed, every familiar face seemed to belong to another world. The world of honest people who earned their money through regular work and slept easy at night. Stiles was already at the office, his wounded shoulder bound up neat and professional. He told Mrs. Patterson he'd fallen off his horse, caught himself on a fence post. "Morning," he said. "Morning." "Sleep?" "Some." "You?" "Enough." They sat at their desks, trying to act normal, waiting for the telegram they knew was coming. It arrived at 9:30, delivered by Charlie Morrison, who looked pale and excited. "Train robbery," Morrison said, handing over the yellow paper. "Hit the evening westbound last night, somewhere west of town." Alvord read the message, with what he hoped looked like professional interest. Railroad officials requesting immediate assistance. Posse needed. Suspects believed to be local. Large reward offered. "Well," he said to Stiles, "looks like we got work to do." "Looks like." "Charlie, you know anything else about this?" "Just what the telegram says. 4 men, maybe 5. Got away with an undetermined amount of cash and valuables." "Anybody hurt?" "Express guard took a bullet in the leg. Nothing serious." "Good. We'll ride out there this morning, see what we can find." After Morrison left, Stiles looked over at Alvord. "So, Deputy Sheriff Alvord is investigating the robbery committed by outlaw Burt Alvord." "Something like that." "Think we can pull it off?" Alvord thought about the money hidden under his mattress, about the look in Juan's eyes when they divided the cash, about the way his hands had stopped shaking once the shooting started. "Yeah," he said. "I think we can pull it off." But even as he said it, he wondered which man was talking, the deputy or the outlaw. And whether, after last night, there was really any difference anymore. Chapter 11. $5,000. The man from the Southern Pacific Railroad laid the poster on Burt Alvord's desk. The ink was still damp. He smoothed it with a hand that wore a gold signet ring. "That's for the 4 of them. Or what's left of them after you find them." His name was Fletcher, and he'd arrived on the morning train wearing a suit that looked too hot for Arizona and a face that looked too angry for a Tuesday. He smelled of cigars and city money. "That's a fair amount of cash," Billy Stiles said from his chair. He leaned forward, his bandaged shoulder making the movement stiff. "Should get people talking." Fletcher's eyes, the color of wet slate, flicked to Stiles. "It's not for talk, Deputy. It's for results. The Southern Pacific does not enjoy being made a fool of." He looked back at Alvord. "The express guard, Miller, he's an old hand. Says they were professionals. Knew the train's schedule, knew the curve in the track. Knew just enough dynamite to stop the train without turning it into scrap." Alvord picked up the poster. The words "Dead or Alive" were printed in letters 2 inches high. He get a look at them? Bandanas. Dark hats. Said one was a big man, maybe Mexican. Another was older, missing fingers on his left hand. The other two, he said they moved like they belonged there. Like they had authority. Fletcher let that hang in the air of the small jailhouse. Sound like anyone you know? Sounds like half the men in Cochise County, Alvord said. He tacked the poster to the wall, next to a wanted notice for a horse thief out of Sonora. The new poster made the old one look tired. Big men, old men, men who think they have authority. We got all kinds. We need a posse, Sheriff. Deputy, Alvord corrected him. Sheriff's in Tombstone. He'll be here by tomorrow, maybe the day after. The railroad can't wait for maybe, Fletcher said. He pulled a folded telegram from his coat pocket. This is from the territorial governor, authorizing you, as the ranking lawman on site, to form a posse and begin the investigation immediately. The Southern Pacific will cover all expenses. Men, horses, ammunition. Whatever you need. Stiles stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. We'll need good trackers. The rain last night will have washed out most of the sign near the canyon. The railroad has already hired the best trackers in the territory, Fletcher said. They're on a train from Tucson now. They'll be here this afternoon. Your job, Deputy Alvord, is to provide the local knowledge. The manpower. The authority. He said the word like it tasted bad. Alvord sat back in his chair, felt it creak. He looked at Fletcher, a man used to giving orders and having them followed without question. You want me to lead it? You're the law here. Who else would lead it? The irony was so thick, Alvord could have cut it with a knife. He looked at Stiles, who gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Don't look too eager. Don't look too smart. I'll need to deputize some men from the ranches, Alvord said. Good men, not just saloon talkers. That takes time. You have until noon, Fletcher said. He checked a gold watch that appeared from his vest. It is now 10:15. That gives you an hour and 45 minutes to find your good men. I will be at the hotel, sending telegrams. I expect to see a body of armed men, led by you, riding out of this town by the time the 1 o'clock train comes through. Fletcher put his hat on, a city hat with a narrow brim. One more thing, Deputy. The man who planned this, he was smart. He knew things. That suggests someone local. Someone who watches the trains. Someone who knows the country. He looked around the small office, at the gun rack, the empty cells, the two lawmen. Keep your eyes open. The man you're looking for might be standing right next to you. He left, the door closing with a solid click behind him. For a long moment neither Alvord nor Stiles spoke. The jailhouse was quiet, except for a fly buzzing against the window pane. Well, Stiles said, turning from the window. He's a pleasant fellow. He's a railroad man, Alvord said. They think they own the world because they laid tracks on it. He stood up, took his hat from the peg. He's right about one thing, though. We need a posse. Who are you going to get? Tom Brennan from the hardware store. Webb from the barber shop. A few of the hands from the Circle C ranch who are in town for supplies. Men who look the part but couldn't track a wagon through a mud puddle. And where are we going to lead them? Stiles asked. South, Alvord said. We'll ride south toward the border for a day or two. Kick up some dust. Make it look good. By the time we get back, Fletcher's trackers will be here, and we can turn the whole mess over to them. You think it'll work? It has to work, Alvord said. Fletcher's right about something else too. The man we're looking for is standing right next to us. He walked out into the September sun. The town looked the same as it always did. Wagons creaked down the street. Men tipped their hats. Mrs. Henderson's cat was up the same tree again. But it felt different. Alvord felt the weight of the $1,000 hidden under his mattress. He felt the weight of Fletcher's suspicion. He felt the weight of the badge on his chest. He found Tom Brennan stacking sacks of flour in front of the hardware store. "Tom, I need to deputize you." Brennan wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his arm. "What for?" "Train robbers hit the Southern Pacific last night west of town." The news spread through Wilcox like a brush fire. Men gathered on the street corners, talking in low voices. Women watched from behind curtains. The robbery was the biggest thing to happen in town since the last Apache scare. By noon, Alvord had his posse. 10 men, armed with a mix of rifles and shotguns, mounted on horses that were more used to herding cattle than chasing outlaws. They gathered in front of the jailhouse, a nervous, excited collection of storekeepers and ranch hands. Fletcher came out of the hotel, looked them over, his face showing nothing. He walked up to Alvord's horse. "This is your posse?" "It's a start," Alvord said. "They look like they're going on a picnic." "They're good men. They know the country." Alvord knew they didn't, not the parts that mattered, but it was the right thing to say. "See that you use them," Fletcher said. He handed Alvord a piece of paper. "This is a list of questions for the train's crew. I want answers by the time you get back." Alvord glanced at the list. "Did you recognize any voices? Any familiar horses? Any distinctive gear?" Questions he already knew the answers to. He folded the paper and put it in his shirt pocket. He looked at the men waiting for his command, their faces turned up to him. He looked past them, at the railroad tracks gleaming in the sun. He thought of the train that would come through in an hour, and the one after that, and the one after that. All of them carrying money. Alvord gathered his reins, his horse shifting under him. He was a deputy sheriff, about to lead a manhunt for himself. He was an outlaw, with $1,000 in his room and a plan for more in his head. He was 2 men in one body, riding out to a future he was making up as he went along. He raised his hand, pointed it south toward the empty desert. "Let's ride." Chapter 12. They could be in Mexico by now. Tom Brennan said it from his saddle, squinting at the heat haze rising from the desert floor. The sun had been beating on the posse for 2 days, and the enthusiasm they'd started with had baked out of them, leaving behind a fine powder of dust and complaint. "They're not in Mexico," Burt Alvord said. He reined in his horse, letting the others catch up. 10 men who looked like they'd been dragged backward through a cactus patch. A man with that much money doesn't run. He finds a place to hole up, wait for the heat to die down. "Well, he picked a hot place to do it," Webb, the barber, said. He had a strip of sunburn across his nose that was peeling. "We ain't cut a track in 2 days that wasn't made by a jackrabbit or one of our own horses." Alvord swung down from his horse, walked in a slow circle. He knelt, pretending to study the ground. It was all part of the show. The frustrated lawman, doing his best against impossible odds. He'd led them south, into a stretch of country so hard and rocky a ghost couldn't leave a trail. It was a perfect waste of time. "They were smart," Alvord said, standing up and dusting his hands on his pants. "Came this way to throw us off, then cut back west toward the Dragoons. Or east toward New Mexico." "So we've been riding the wrong way for 2 days?" Brennan asked. The question had an edge to it. "We've been confirming they didn't come this way," Alvord said. "That's how police work is done, Tom. You eliminate the possibilities until the only one left is the truth." He didn't know if that was true, but it sounded good. It sounded professional. He saw the riders before the others did. 3 of them, coming from the north, kicking up dust. They rode with a purpose his own men lacked. "Company," Alvord said. The 3 men rode up and stopped, their horses looking fresh. The man in the lead was an Apache, maybe half-blood, with eyes that saw everything, and a face that showed nothing. The two white men with him looked like they'd been born in the saddle, and had never found a good reason to get out of it. "You Deputy Alvord?" the Apache asked. His voice was low and flat. "That's right. Name's Cruz. Mr. Fletcher from the railroad sent us. Said you might need help finding tracks." He looked at the ground around Alvord's feet, then at the faces of the posse. His gaze lingered for a moment, unimpressed. "We were just about to head back," Alvord said. "Trail's gone cold here. Figured they doubled back toward the mountains." Cruz dismounted in a single fluid motion. He walked over to a patch of gravelly soil Alvord had been careful to ride over a dozen times. He crouched, his fingers tracing patterns in the dirt that were invisible to anyone else. "4 horses came through here yesterday," Cruz said without looking up. "Riding hard. One horse was heavy, carrying double or a heavy pack. Another throws its left foreleg. Shod with a worn shoe." One of the men with Cruz spoke. "That matches the description of a horse stolen from a ranch near Fairbank 2 nights ago. The night of the robbery." Alvord felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. These men were real. They weren't playing a part in a show. They were trackers, and they were good. Too good. "Which way were they headed?" Alvord asked, keeping his voice even. Cruz pointed. Not south, where Alvord had led his men, but northeast, back toward Wilcox. "They're making for the Chiricahuas," Cruz said. "Find a canyon, lie low. Smart. But not smart enough to hide their trail from a man who knows how to look." Alvord looked at his posse. They were watching him, waiting to see what he would do. He was the law. He was in charge. But the Apache tracker had just undone 2 days of his careful misdirection in 2 minutes. "The Chiricahuas are rough country," Alvord said. "Easy for a man to get lost in there." "Easy for a man to hide too," Cruz said. He stood up, his dark eyes fixed on Alvord. "You coming with us, deputy? Or you want to keep looking for jackrabbits down here?" The challenge was plain. Alvord had a choice. Go with them and try to steer them wrong again, or let them go and risk them finding something. Or someone. Juan Yaqui had friends in the Chiricahuas. So did Jack Dunlap. "Our horses are spent," Alvord said. "And my men are storekeepers, not mountain climbers. We'll head back to town, get fresh mounts and supplies. You go on ahead. We'll meet you at the mouth of Turkey Creek Canyon tomorrow morning." Cruz considered that. He looked from Alvord to the tired horses of the posse, then back to Alvord. "Turkey Creek. Sunrise. We'll be there." The 3 trackers rode off, heading northeast, moving with the easy confidence of men who knew exactly what they were doing. Alvord watched them go, feeling the operation start to slip from his control. "Who the hell was that?" Tom Brennan asked. "The professionals," Alvord said. He swung back into his saddle. "Let's go home." The ride back to Wilcox was quiet. The posse was discouraged, their adventure having turned into a long, hot, pointless ride that ended with them being shown up by 3 strangers. They got back to town just after dark. Alvord dismissed the men, telling them to be ready to ride again at 4 in the morning. He walked to the jailhouse, the dust of the trail thick on his clothes and in his throat. Stiles was waiting, a lamp lit on his desk. "How'd it go?" "We ran into Fletcher's trackers." Stiles sat up straight. "And?" "They're good. Real good. They picked up the trail, heading for the Chiricahuas." "Our trail?" "Looks like it. One of the horses was leaving a distinct track." Stiles swore, a quiet, vicious sound. "Whose horse?" "Don't know. But it was one of ours." Alvord poured a cup of water from the bucket and drank it down. It tasted of metal and dust. "I sent them on ahead. Told them we'd meet them at Turkey Creek tomorrow morning. giving Juan and Jack a chance to clear out. "It's the best I could do. I need you to ride out there tonight, Billy. Find them. Tell them the law is coming. Real law this time. Tell them to scatter, get lost, stay lost. And what about you? I'm going to take my new posse of shopkeepers on another long ride. We'll get to Turkey Creek late tomorrow, find an empty camp. The trail will be gone by then." Stiles stood up, went to the gun rack and took down a rifle. "This is getting complicated, Burt." "It was always complicated," Alvord said. "We just didn't know how much." He took off his badge and polished it on his sleeve, a nervous habit he'd developed in the last few days. He was playing a part, but the part was starting to feel real. The lies were starting to feel like truth. "What about the money?" Stiles asked. "What about it? Still feel like it was worth it?" Alvord thought about the $1,000 under his mattress. He thought about the $29,000 they'd left behind in that safe. He thought about the Apache tracker's eyes, how they'd seemed to look right through him. "Ask me tomorrow," he said. Stiles checked the rifle's action, slung it over his good shoulder. He walked to the door, then paused. "Burt, be careful. You too." Stiles slipped out into the night. Alvord sat alone in the lamplight, the weight of the whole damn thing settling on him. He was leading a posse to hunt his own men, sending his partner to warn them, lying to the railroad, the town, and himself. He pulled the list of questions Fletcher had given him from his pocket. "Did you recognize any voices?" He thought of his own voice, shouting at the express guard. "Any familiar horses?" He thought of the horse with the worn shoe. He crumpled the paper in his fist. He stood up and walked to the new wanted poster on the wall. $5,000. Dead or alive. He was hunting himself for money he didn't need, for a crime he'd already been paid for. He blew out the lamp and stood in the dark, listening to the night sounds of the town he was betraying. He had to hold it together for one more day. One more ride. After that, he had no idea what would happen. He pulled his gun from its holster, the metal cool and solid in his hand. Chapter 13. This one's not even ticking. Three-fingered, Jack Dunlap held the gold pocket watch to his ear, then shook it. Nothing. He tossed it onto the dusty wool blanket, where the rest of the jewelry lay, catching the lantern light. It landed with a dull, cheap-sounding clink. "Maybe it just needs winding," Billy Stiles said. He was sitting on a crate, his shoulder almost healed, his patience wearing thin. "I wound it," Dunlap said. "It's broken. Same as the clasp on this necklace, and the stone in this ring that's probably glass." He nudged a brooch with the toe of his boot. "We risked our necks for a bag of trinkets from a mail-order catalog." They were in Dunlap's line shack again, a month after the robbery. A month since Alvord had led a posse of fools on a wild goose chase south, and Billy Stiles had ridden through the night to warn the others. The trackers had found an empty camp at Turkey Creek, the trail scattered in 4 different directions. Fletcher had left town in a fury, the railroad was out $4,000, and the Wilcox jailhouse was back to dealing with drunks and stray dogs. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. "It's not all junk," Burt Alvord said. He picked up a silver locket, heavy in his palm. "This is real. So are these earrings." He had the spoils laid out on the blanket, trying to make 4 piles of equal value. It wasn't easy. Cash was simple. Cash was honest. A man knew what a dollar was worth. But a gold watch that didn't tick, that was a matter of opinion. Bravo Juan sat on a bunk, sharpening a knife on a whetstone. He hadn't said a word, just watched the other 3 argue. Zing. 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 The sound of steel on stone was the only steady thing in the room. "My opinion," Dunlap said, "is that my $1,000 share of the cash is looking smaller every day." For the risk we took, for what could have happened. He held up his left hand, the one with the missing fingers. I've paid more for less, but I didn't like it then either. We all took the same risk, Styles said. Did we? Dunlap's eyes were hard. You and Alvord, you got your 30-a-month jobs. You got badges to hide behind. Me and Juan, we just got our skins. Seems to me that makes our risk a little higher. Zing. Zing. Juan tested the blade on his thumb, then went back to sharpening. Alvord knew this was the dangerous moment. The moment a partnership held together by money started to fray when the money wasn't enough. The plan was solid. It worked. Nobody got caught. The plan was to get 30,000, Dunlap shot back. We got 4. And a pile of broken jewelry. That's not what I call working. It was a start, Alvord said, his voice low. He let the word hang in the air. Dunlap stopped his pacing. A start to what? To the next one. Alvord looked at the men one by one. Styles, who nodded, already in. Juan, who paused his sharpening, his face unreadable. Dunlap, whose expression soured, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. There's no next one, Dunlap said. We had a deal. One job. Clean break. The deal was for a score that would set us up, Alvord said. This doesn't set a man up. This buys him a new horse and a month's worth of whiskey. I'm talking about finishing the job. Hitting that train again. You're crazy, Dunlap said. They'll have guards on that train now. Not 1 man, but 4. 5. They'll be waiting for it. And we'll be waiting for them, Styles said, leaning forward. This time, we know what we're up against. This time, we come prepared for that Mosler safe. Prepared how? Dunlap sneered. You going to ask it to open real nice? There are men who can open safes, Alvord said. Professionals. Nitroglycerin men from back east. A man could be hired. More men means more shares, Dunlap said. And more tongues to wag when it's over. He shook his head. No. I'm out. I'll take my share of this junk and call it a day. What if we don't want you out? Styles said. His hand had moved, was resting on the butt of his pistol. Juan stopped sharpening his knife. The silence in the shack was sudden and heavy. Billy, Alvord said, his voice a quiet command. Styles didn't move for a second, then his hand relaxed. You threatening me, deputy? Dunlap asked, his voice soft. Just making a point, Styles said. A man knows things. It makes him a liability. Everybody in this room is a liability to everybody else, Dunlap said. That's the business we're in. He looked at Alvord. Call off your boy. He's young. He doesn't understand how these things work. Loyalty lasts as long as the money does. And the money's already spent. Alvord stood up. Nobody's threatening anybody. Jack, you want out, you're out. Take your pile. He pointed to one of the sorry collections of jewelry on the blanket. Dunlap looked at the pile. A broken watch, a ring with a glass stone, a pair of silver earrings. He looked at the other men. He looked at the door. This is it. This is what I get for keeping my mouth shut. You get what we all got, Alvord said. And you get to walk away clean. There's no such thing as clean in a job like this, Dunlap said. He walked over and scooped his share into a leather pouch. But I'll tell you something for free. You go after that train again, you're fools. The railroad doesn't forget, and that man Fletcher, he's not the kind to give up. They'll catch you. And when they do, and they offer you a deal to talk, remember that every man looks out for himself. He walked to the door and pulled it open. The desert night air swept in, cool and smelling of sage. Jack, Alvord said. Dunlap turned, his silhouette framed by the stars. You talk, we'll hear about it. Dunlap gave a short, bitter laugh. "Don't you worry about me, deputy. You got enough to worry about right here in this room." He glanced at Juan, then at Styles. "You worry about who's going to talk first when the rope is dangling over your head." He stepped out and was gone, melting into the darkness. The three men left in the shack were quiet for a long time. Finally, Juan put his knife and whetstone away. He stood up and walked over to the blanket. He looked at the three remaining piles of jewelry. Without a word, he took the smallest one, nodded to Alvord, and walked out the door. He didn't say if he was in or out. He just left. Now, it was just the two of them. The two deputies who had started it all. "He's going to be a problem," Styles said, staring at the empty doorway where Dunlap had been. "Maybe," Alvord said. "Maybe not. A man that bitter, he's like a bottle of bad whiskey, just waiting to be uncorked." Alvord didn't answer. He was looking at the two piles of jewelry left on the blanket. It looked like so little. Not nearly enough to buy a man's silence. Not nearly enough to stop a man from getting scared or getting greedy. He walked to the door and looked out into the vast, empty darkness where his partners had disappeared. He could hear the faint sound of a horse moving away to the south and another to the east. They were all scattering again. But this time, it felt different. It didn't feel like a plan. It felt like an ending. Alvord reached up and touched the badge on his shirt. It felt cold, like a piece of metal left out in the night. He pulled the door shut, the heavy wood thudding into the frame, closing them in with the silence and the choices they had made. Chapter 14. The first snow of winter dusted the peaks of the Chiricahuas, a white promise of colder days to come. Down in Wilcox, the dust settled, the heat broke, and the train robbery of September 8th became a story people told over beers at the arcade saloon. The tale got bigger with each telling. The robbers were 10 feet tall, invisible ghosts who rode demon horses. The stolen loot was 100,000, a million, enough to make a man a king. Burt Alvord let them talk. He'd bought a new saddle with his share of the money, a handsome piece of leatherwork from a shop in Tucson. When people asked, he said an uncle back east had died and left him a little something. It was a small town. Nobody questioned a piece of good fortune. They were more interested in Billy Styles. Styles had bought a new suit, pearl gray and cut sharp. He'd taken to spending his evenings with one of the girls who worked at the hotel, buying her dinners and trinkets from the general store. He played poker 2 nights a week, and his luck was good, or maybe his wallet was just thick enough now that he could afford to bluff without sweating. Alvord watched it all from behind the badge he polished every morning. He did his job. He arrested a ranch hand for getting drunk and shooting at the moon. He settled a dispute between 2 merchants over a property line. He was the same deputy Alvord he'd always been, just with a better saddle and a taste for more expensive whiskey. But something had changed in the way he saw the town, the way he saw his partner. He was sitting in the jailhouse cleaning his rifle when Styles came in whistling. It was a cold afternoon, and the potbelly stove was glowing red. Styles smelled of bay rum and the perfume the hotel girl wore. "You're in a good mood," Alvord said, not looking up from his work. "Why shouldn't I be?" Styles unpinned his badge and tossed it on his desk. "It's payday. The county remembered us this month." He pulled a thin stack of bills from the envelope. $30. Barely enough to cover my poker losses from last night. He laughed. "You're losing now." Alvord ran an oiled rag down the barrel of the rifle. A man's luck can't hold forever. But it was a good run. Styles sat down, put his feet up on the desk. His boots were new, too, polished to a high shine. "Besides, it's just money." "There's no such thing as just money," Alvord said. "Not for us." Styles stopped whistling. He looked over at Alvord. What's that supposed to mean? It means a man who never had 2 dimes to rub together is suddenly throwing money around like it's confetti. People notice things like that. People in this town notice if the train is 2 minutes late. They don't notice a man enjoying a run of good luck. They notice the new suit, the new boots. They notice you buying champagne for a hotel girl who used to not give you the time of day. Alvord finally looked at him. They notice, Billy. They just don't know what they're noticing yet. You're getting jumpy, Burt. It's been 4 months. Nobody's looking for us anymore. Fletcher's gone back to whatever city office he crawled out of. The trackers are gone. It's over. It's not over, Alvord said. It's never over. He gestured with the rifle toward the window. You see that train that comes through every evening? They put a new man in the express car. A fellow named Gable. Used to be a marshal in the Indian Territories. Hard man. And he doesn't ride alone. There's another guard with him now, every trip. Stiles shrugged. So they double the guard. That's just the railroad being careful. That's the railroad remembering, Alvord said. They don't forget a thing like that. They're just waiting. For a mistake. For someone to get careless. And you think that's me. I think you're enjoying the money more than you're respecting what it cost us to get it. Alvord stood the rifle in the corner and sat down at his desk. He opened a drawer and took out a bottle and 2 glasses. He poured. It's not just about being careful, Billy. It's about being smart. We have an advantage no other outlaws have. We are the law. We know what they're thinking because we're the ones they talk to. But that only works as long as they don't start thinking about us. Stiles took the glass of whiskey. You worry too much. You always have. And you don't worry enough. You never have. Alvord drank, the whiskey burning a clean line down his throat. That's why we made a good team. But this is different. One mistake now, one loose word in a poker game, one brag to a girl after too much champagne, that's all it takes. I'm not stupid, Burt. I never said you were. I said you were careless. They sat in silence for a while, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall and the hiss of the stove. Outside, the afternoon light began to fade. The 5:15 train whistled in the distance. Both men looked toward the sound, a habit they'd had for years. But now, it meant something different. It wasn't just a clock marking the end of the day. It was a reminder. A rolling iron bank that they had robbed once, and that Alvord, at least, intended to rob again. I saw Juan the other day, Stiles said, changing the subject. He was in town for supplies. Didn't say a word to me. Just looked right through me. He's smart, Alvord said. He knows the job isn't over until we're all dead or gone. And Dunlap? Haven't seen or heard a thing. Which is probably for the best. Alvord finished his whiskey. But he's out there. Same as Juan. Loose ends. The train pulled into the station, the squeal of its brakes carrying on the cold air. Alvord stood up and walked to the window. He could see the express car, see the new guard, Gable, step out onto the platform. He was a big man, with a shotgun held easy in the crook of his arm. He scanned the platform, his eyes missing nothing. He looked like a man who was expecting trouble and half hoped to find it. Alvord watched him, and he felt the old boredom, the old dissatisfaction stir inside him. But it was different now. It was sharper. It was the feeling of a professional sizing up a job. The $1,000 he'd made was a good start. But the real prize was still rolling through this town twice a month. And all the new suits and fancy boots in the world weren't going to make him forget that. He turned from the window. Just be careful, Billy. That's all I'm saying. All right, Burt. I'll be careful. Stiles finished his drink and stood up to put on his coat. I'm taking Clara to dinner at the hotel. You want to join us? No, Alvord said. I've got reports to finish. After Stiles left, Alvord sat at his desk, but he didn't work on reports. He pulled out a map of Arizona territory he'd gotten from the land office. He spread it out, the paper crackling in the quiet room. He traced the thin black line of the Southern Pacific tracks with his finger, from Wilcox west into the desert. He was looking for another curve in the tracks. Another lonely place. He was playing his part, the quiet, dependable deputy. But in his mind, he was already miles away, planning the next move, living the life he'd chosen the moment he decided that $30 a month wasn't enough. The double life was a strain, but it was a hell of a lot better than no life at all. Chapter 15. The man who stepped off the train from El Paso didn't look like a railroad detective. He looked like a preacher who'd lost his faith somewhere on the trail. He was tall and thin, dressed in a black suit that had seen better days, and he carried a worn leather satchel instead of a gun belt. But the way he looked at the town, at the faces on the platform, was not the way a preacher looked at a flock. It was the way a wolf looks at sheep. His name was Heck Thomas, and he was a U.S. Marshal. The railroad hadn't given up. They'd just gone over the county's head. He walked into the jailhouse without knocking, his boots making no sound on the wooden floor. He set his satchel on the empty desk and looked at Burt Alvord, then at Billy Stiles. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, and they seemed to take in the entire room in a single glance. "I'm Marshal Thomas," he said. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but it carried. "The Attorney General's office has taken an interest in your train robbery." "We're doing all we can, Marshal," Alvord said. He stood up, trying to project an authority he didn't feel. "It's a big country. Hard to find men who don't want to be found." "Men always want to be found," Thomas said. "They just don't know it. They leave trails. A spent cartridge. A careless word. A woman who knows where he hides his money." He opened his satchel and took out a stack of papers. "I've read the reports. Yours. The railroads. The Pinkertons they hired for a month. A lot of writing. Not a lot of finding." "We followed the only trail there was," Stiles said. "It went cold in the Chiricahuas." Thomas looked at Stiles, a long, unblinking stare. "Did it now?" He spread a map on the desk, the same map Alvord had been studying for months. "The Chiricahuas are a good place to hide. But they're a better place to make people think you're hiding." He tapped a spot on the map, miles south of the mountains. "A man I know, a tracker, says the real trail, the one a smart man would follow, went this way. Toward Mexico. But it disappeared. Wiped clean. As if someone knew he was being followed and took the time to sweep up behind himself." Alvord felt his hands go cold. He remembered the Apache tracker, Cruz. Remembered sending him into the mountains while he led his own posse in circles. "A good tracker can be wrong," Alvord said. "Cruz is never wrong about tracks," Thomas said. "He's only wrong about men." The marshal looked up, his pale eyes moving between the two deputies. He said the lawman leading the posse seemed more interested in riding south than east. Seemed determined to believe the outlaws had run for the border. "I was following my best judgment," Alvord said. The words sounded weak, even to him. "Your judgment led to a dead end," Thomas said. "Mine rarely does." He folded the map. "I'm not here to take over your investigation, deputy. I'm here to help. To provide resources. To ask questions you might not have thought to ask." "Ask away," Stiles said a little too quickly. "All right." Thomas leaned against the desk. "The express guard, Miller. He said one of the robbers was an older man, missing fingers on his left hand. You know anyone like that? A few, Alvord said. Ranch work is hard on the hands. So is mining. This man wasn't a ranch hand. He knew dynamite. He knew how to blow a door without bringing down the whole car. That's a specialized skill. Can't say I know anyone like that, Alvord said. The lie came easier this time. He was getting better at it. And the leader, Thomas continued, his voice still quiet, conversational. Miller said he had a voice of authority. A man used to giving orders. Like a lawman, maybe. Or an army officer. A lot of men around here were in the army, Stiles said. But not a lot of them are lawmen, Thomas replied. He pushed himself off the desk. I'll be staying at the hotel. I'll want to see all your files on the case in the morning. Your notes. The witness statements you took. We'll have them for you, Alvord said. Thomas picked up his satchel. At the door, he paused. One more thing. The money from the robbery, the part that was recovered, was in new bills. Sequential serial numbers. The Treasury is tracking them. Sooner or later, one of those bills is going to show up in a bank, in a general store, in a poker game. He looked directly at Stiles. A man with a sudden run of good luck ought to be careful what kind of cash he's lucky with. He left. The door swung shut, leaving a heavy silence behind him. Stiles let out a breath he seemed to have been holding since Thomas walked in. Jesus, Burt. He knows. He doesn't know, Alvord said, but his own heart was pounding. He suspects. That's different. He's a professional poker player, and he's trying to see if we'll show our hand. He looked right at me when he talked about the money. Stiles ran a hand through his hair. His face was pale. The suit, the boots. God, you were right. I've been a fool. It's not too late to stop being one, Alvord said. He walked to the window, watched the marshal cross the street toward the hotel. Thomas didn't walk like other men. He moved with a slow, deliberate economy of motion, as if he never wasted a step. He's going to start talking to people. The train crew. The telegraph operator. Charlie Morrison. He's going to shake every tree in this town until something falls out. What do? We do our jobs, Alvord said, turning from the window. We give him the files. We answer his questions. We are the most helpful, hard-working, honest-to-God deputies he has ever met. We get so close to his investigation, he can't see us. And the money? Stiles asked, his voice tight with panic. What about the money I've been spending? That's done. You can't take it back. From now on, you're as poor as you ever were. Your luck ran out. You complain about the $30 a month the county pays us. You are exactly what you seem to be. The pressure was no longer a distant thing, a worry for later. It was here, in their office, sleeping in their hotel. It had a name, and a pair of pale blue eyes that saw too much. Alvord felt the walls of his double life closing in. The game had a new player, one who knew the rules better than they did. And he had a feeling that for Heck Thomas, this wasn't a game at all. Chapter 16. You calling me a cheat? The saloon in Pierce smelled of stale beer and desperation. Three-fingered Jack Dunlap looked at the cards in his hand, 2 pair jacks over 8s, then at the man across the table. The man's name was Cale, and he was a miner with more muscle than sense, and a pistol stuck in his belt that he seemed proud of. I'm saying that ace didn't fall out of the sky, Cale said. He pointed a thick finger at the card Jack had just dealt himself from the bottom of the deck. The pot in the middle of the table held maybe $4. It wasn't about the money. It was about the accusation. Jack had been feeling cheated for months, a low burn in his gut that whiskey couldn't put out. Cheated out of $30,000 by a locked safe, cheated out of a fair share of the jewelry by 2 deputies who thought they were smarter than him. Now this loudmouth miner was calling him out over a $4 pot. "The deck is worn," Jack said, his voice flat. "Cards stick." "That one didn't stick. It slid." Cale pushed his chair back. It scraped on the gritty floor. "I don't like playing with cheats." Jack looked around the room. 2 other miners at the bar, watching in the mirror. The bartender was polishing a glass, pretending he didn't hear. This was how things started. A wrong word, a pushed-back chair. "Then maybe you should find another game," Jack said. He started to rake in the pot with his good hand. Cale's hand shot out and clamped down on Jack's wrist. "You're not touching that money." Jack looked down at the miner's hand on his arm, then back up at his face. The anger that had been simmering for months boiled over. It wasn't Cale's hand he was seeing. It was Alvord's, Stiles's, the whole damn world's, holding him down, keeping what was his. He moved fast. He brought his left hand, the one with the missing fingers, up in a hard chop against Cale's forearm. The miner grunted in surprise, and his grip loosened. In that same motion, Jack drew his pistol. It wasn't a clean draw. He was 50, not 20, and the whiskey had slowed him. Cale was already pulling his own gun. The first shot was Cale's. It was wild, fired from the hip, and it shattered a bottle of whiskey on the shelf behind the bar. Glass exploded, and the bartender ducked. Jack's shot was better. It caught Cale in the shoulder, spinning him half around. But Cale was big and drunk, and didn't seem to notice. He brought his gun up again, this time with both hands. The saloon exploded with noise. 2 shots, so close together they sounded like one. Jack felt a white-hot punch in his gut. It knocked the wind out of him, lifted him off his feet. He hit the floor hard, his gun skittering away under a table. He saw Cale standing over him, swaying, his face a mask of stupid surprise, before he crumpled to his knees and then fell forward, a dark stain spreading across the back of his shirt. The room was suddenly quiet, filled with smoke and the sharp smell of gunpowder. Jack tried to push himself up. A fire was burning in his belly, a terrible, searing heat. He looked down. The front of his shirt was soaked, turning black in the dim light. The bartender peeked over the bar. "Jesus Christ, Jack." "Help me up," Jack gasped. The words came out wet. People were running in from the street now. A town constable named Prentice pushed his way through the crowd. He was a young man who mostly dealt with stray cattle and Saturday night drunks. He looked at Cale's body, then at Jack on the floor, and his face went pale. "What happened here?" "He called me a cheat," Jack said. It was getting hard to breathe. Every breath was like swallowing fire. They carried him to the doctor's office down the street. It was a single room that smelled of carbolic acid and regret. The doctor was an old man with shaky hands who'd been drinking. He cut open Jack's shirt, poked at the wound, and shook his head. "It's bad, Jack. Went right through you. Tore up your insides." "Fix it," Jack whispered. "Ain't nothing to fix," the doctor said, wiping his hands on his apron. "You're bleeding out from the inside. Maybe an hour. Maybe less." The constable, Prentice, stood in the doorway, wringing his hat in his hands. "You want me to get a preacher, Jack?" Jack tried to laugh, but it came out as a bloody cough. Preacher. The word was absurd. He lay on the narrow cot, the fire in his gut spreading, and he saw it all with a terrible clarity. He was going to die here, in a dusty town he didn't know, over a $4 poker game. He was going to die broke and alone, while Burt Alvord and Billy Stiles sat safe in Wilcox wearing their badges, counting their money. The injustice of it was a poison worse than the bullet. They'd cheated him. They'd planned a job for $30,000 and settled for $4. They'd given him a broken watch for his trouble and told him to walk away clean. And he, like a fool, had done it. He'd kept his mouth shut. Not anymore. "Prentice," he rasped. The young constable came closer. "Yeah, Jack." "Get a pencil." "Paper." "What for?" "I'm going to make a statement." Jack's vision was starting to tunnel. The edges of the room were going dark. But the rage kept him focused. The rage was a light. "You want to be a famous man, son? You want to make a name for yourself?" I don't know, Jack." "You write down what I tell you, and you'll be the man who caught the Wilcox train robbers." Prentice's eyes went wide. He fumbled in his coat for a notepad and a stub of a pencil. The doctor had given Jack a shot of morphine, and it was dulling the pain, but it was making the world swim. He had to get it out before it was too late. "The train," he said, his voice a strained whisper. "The Southern Pacific. September 8th. He coughed and blood flecked his lips. "It was me. And 3 others." "Who, Jack?" Prentice was scribbling, the pencil scratching loud in the quiet room. "Who were the others?" Jack smiled, a grim, bloody stretching of his lips. He thought of Alvord, polishing his badge. He thought of Styles in his new suit. He was going to burn it all down. If he had to die in this room, he wasn't going to die alone. "The men who led the posse," he said, the words coming slow, each one a victory against the darkness closing in. "The lawman, Deputy Burt Alvord, and his partner, Billy Styles." Chapter 17. The telegraph key in the Wilcox station office began to chatter just after 9 in the morning. Charlie Morrison, his head aching from the night before, wrote down the words as they came, his pencil moving slowly. When the message was complete, he read it once, then again. His hands began to shake. He ran out of the office without his hat, the yellow piece of paper clutched in his fist, and didn't stop until he reached the hotel. U.S. Marshal Heck Thomas was finishing his breakfast in the dining room. He was eating steak and eggs, cutting the meat into small, precise pieces. He looked up as Morrison burst in, his face pale. "Marshal, this just came from Pierce. You need to see this." Thomas took the telegram. He unfolded it and read it, his expression not changing. He took a sip of his coffee. He read it a second time, his pale blue eyes moving over the frantic words from a young constable named Prentice. "Marshal Thomas, stop. Have dying declaration from John Dunlap, a.k.a. Three-Fingered Jack. Stop. Dunlap mortally wounded in saloon shooting. Stop. Confessed to Southern Pacific robbery September 8th. Stop. Named accomplices. Stop. Deputy Burt Alvord and Deputy Billy Styles of Wilcox. Stop. Awaiting instructions. Constable Prentice, Pierce A.T." Thomas folded the telegram neatly and placed it in his coat pocket. He finished his last piece of steak, chewed it slowly, and wiped his mouth with a napkin. He looked at Morrison, who was shifting his weight from foot to foot, looking like he might bolt. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. You've been very helpful." Is it true, Marshal?" "Truth is a funny thing, Mr. Morrison," Thomas said, placing a few coins on the table for his meal. "It's always there. Just takes a while for the light to hit it right." He stood up, put on his hat, and walked out of the hotel into the bright morning sun. He didn't hurry. He paused on the boardwalk, looking across the street at the jailhouse. He could see Alvord through the window, sitting at his desk reading a newspaper. Just another quiet morning in a quiet town. Thomas had been in Wilcox for a week. A week of watching, listening, reading the same useless reports over and over. He'd known the answer wasn't in the papers. The answer was in the men who wrote them. He'd suspected it from the moment he'd heard about the posse riding south. Outlaws don't run toward Mexico. They run for the high country, the rocks, the places a horse can't easily go. Alvord knew that. A lawman with his experience would have known that. The ride south wasn't a mistake. It was a performance. He stepped off the boardwalk and started across the street. The dust puffed up around his boots. The town was going about its business. A freight wagon rumbled past. Two women were talking over a fence. No one knew that the world was about to turn upside down. He walked into the jailhouse. The conversation inside stopped. Burt Alvord looked up from his paper. Billy Stiles was polishing his new boots, a look of boredom on his face. The room smelled of coffee and gun oil. "Morning, Marshal," Alvord said. His voice was calm, steady. "Find any train robbers yet?" "I believe I have," Thomas said. He stood in the middle of the room, his hands at his sides. He didn't reach for a gun. He didn't need to. The telegram in his pocket was heavier than any pistol. Stiles stopped polishing his boot. He looked from Thomas to Alvord, a nervous energy suddenly about him. "What's that mean?" Thomas took the telegram from his pocket. He didn't hand it to them. He held it. "I received a message this morning from a constable in Pierce. A man named Jack Dunlap was in a gunfight last night. He didn't fare too well." Alvord's face was a stone mask, but Thomas saw a flicker in his eyes. A tightening around the mouth. He knew the name. "Before he died," Thomas continued, his voice quiet, "Mr. Dunlap made a full confession. About the train robbery." Stiles put the boot down. He licked his lips. He confessed. Just like that. "Dying has a way of making a man want to clear his conscience," Thomas said. "Or settle his grudges." He unfolded the paper. He said there were 3 others with him. He named them. The silence in the room was absolute. The ticking of the clock on the wall sounded like hammer blows. Alvord hadn't moved. He was watching Thomas, his eyes dark, calculating. Stiles looked like a trapped animal. "He named the men who planned it," Thomas said, his gaze fixed on Alvord. "The men who knew the train schedules. The men who knew the country. The men who led the posse on a pointless ride south, while their partners scattered to the east." He let the words settle. He saw the truth dawn in Stiles's face, the panic rising. He saw the last bit of hope die in Alvord's eyes, replaced by a hard, cold resignation. "He called you a cheat," Stiles blurted out, the words tumbling out of him. "That's what this is." Dunlap was angry about his share. "He's lying to save his own skin." "His skin was full of holes, Deputy," Thomas said. "He had nothing to save." He looked at Alvord. "You're quiet." Alvord slowly folded his newspaper and set it on the desk. He looked at his hands, then up at Thomas. "What's the telegram say, Marshal?" Thomas read it. He read it all, from the first word to the last. His voice was flat, without emotion, a simple recitation of facts. When he finished, the names, Deputy Burt Alvord and Deputy Billy Stiles, seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Stiles jumped to his feet. "It's a lie." He was a dying man, delirious. "You can't take the word of a man like that, over 2 sworn officers of the law." "I can," Thomas said. "Because it's the first thing I've heard since I got to this town that makes any sense." He took a step forward. "I'm going to have to ask for your guns." Alvord didn't hesitate. He unbuckled his gun belt and laid it carefully on the desk. The gesture was deliberate, final. "Burt, what are you doing?" Stiles cried, his voice cracking. "We can't just—" "It's over, Billy," Alvord said. He didn't look at Stiles. He was still looking at Thomas. It was a look of professional respect. One player acknowledging another at the end of a game. Thomas turned his pale eyes to Stiles. "Your gun, Deputy." Stiles stared, his face a mess of disbelief and terror. He looked at his pistol, then at the door, then at the bars on the empty jail cells. There was nowhere to run. The lie they had lived for months had just collapsed on top of them. Slowly, his hand went to his holster. Chapter 18. Turn around. Hands behind your back. Heck, Thomas's voice was as quiet as it had been all morning, but the words were made of iron. Billy Stiles turned, his movements jerky like a puppet with tangled strings. The click of the handcuffs locking around his wrists was the loudest sound Burt Alvord had ever heard. Alvord turned without being told. He put his hands behind his back and felt the cold steel bite into his own skin. He'd put cuffs on 100 men. He'd never thought about how they felt. They felt like the end of the world. "Where are you taking us?" Stiles asked. His voice was thin. "Tombstone," Thomas said. "County seat. You'll be arraigned there. The sheriff is meeting us at the station." He looked at the two men, now prisoners in their own jail. "Let's go. There's a train to catch." The walk from the jailhouse to the depot was 100 yards. It felt like 100 miles. Word had spread, the way bad news always does, carried on whispers from Charlie Morrison's telegraph office to the hotel, from the hotel to the general store, from the store to every corner of the town. The people of Wilcox came out to watch. They stood on the boardwalks, in the doorways of their shops, their faces a mixture of shock and a strange, hungry curiosity. These were the people Alvord had shared a drink with, the men he'd played cards with, the women who had nodded good morning to him for 5 years. Now they stared at him, as if he were a creature from another world. Tom Brennan stood in front of his hardware store, an apron tied around his waist, his mouth hanging slightly open. He looked from the shackles on Alvord's wrists to Alvord's face, his eyes asking a question he didn't have the words for. Alvord met his gaze and gave a slow, deliberate nod, a final, silent acknowledgement. "Yes, it's true." Webb, the barber, was standing with his razor still in his hand, a customer half lathered in the chair behind him. He just shook his head, a slow, sad motion. Alvord walked with his head up. He kept his shoulders back. He looked at the faces in the crowd, one by one. He saw their confusion, their betrayal. He saw a few who looked away, unable to meet his eyes. He was their deputy, their protector, and he had been the wolf inside the fence the whole time. He felt a strange, defiant pride. He had fooled them all. He had played the game, and played it well, and if he had lost in the end, it was not for lack of skill. Stiles was a different story. He kept his head down, his new hat pulled low, his gaze fixed on the dusty street in front of him. He stumbled once, and Thomas caught his arm to steady him, his grip firm. Stiles was not thinking about pride or defiance. He was thinking about odds. Alvord could see it in the tense set of his shoulders. Stiles was a poker player, and he had just been dealt a hand he couldn't win. So, he was already thinking about how to play the next one. He was calculating. What did he know? What could he trade? Who could he sell out to save himself? The questions were as plain on his face as the dust on his new boots. As they reached the station platform, the 5:15 was pulling in, hissing steam. The same train. The one they had watched 1,000 times, the one they had stopped in a dark canyon with dynamite and guns. The irony was so thick, it was suffocating. The conductor, a man named Harris who Alvord knew well, stared at them, his ticket punch frozen in his hand. "Marshal? What in God's name?" "Official business, Mr. Harris," Thomas said. "I need the last car cleared." Passengers leaned out the windows, their faces a gallery of gaping mouths and wide eyes. They were being put on the train like livestock, a spectacle for the paying customers. Thomas pushed them toward the steps of the rear car. On the platform, standing by the station master's office, was Clara, the hotel girl. She was holding a handkerchief to her mouth, her eyes red. She had been crying. She looked at Stiles, her face a portrait of disbelief. Stiles wouldn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the floor, on his future, on the calculations running through his head. Clara was part of a life that had just ended. She was a poker chip he had already lost. "Burt," Stiles whispered, his voice hoarse as they were herded up the steps. "Burt, what are we going to do?" Alvord stopped at the top of the steps and looked back at the town. At the false front buildings, the dusty street, the small crowd of stunned faces. He had been bored here. He had despised the quiet, the sameness of it all. Now he felt a strange pang of loss. "You're going to do what you think is best for you, Billy," Alvord said, his voice low enough that only Stiles could hear. "You always have." It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact. A final summing up of the man he had called his partner. Thomas nudged him forward into the empty car. He sat them on opposite sides of the aisle, their hands cuffed behind them. The sheriff from Tombstone, a big man with a handlebar mustache, came aboard and stood guard at the door. The train whistle blew, a long, mournful sound. With a lurch and a groan of coupling cars, the train began to move. Alvord looked out the window. He watched Wilcox slide away. The jailhouse, the hotel, the faces on the platform shrinking with distance. He was leaving it all behind. He felt the weight of his choices, the weight of the life he had thrown away for a taste of something more. He felt the cold reality of the bars that were waiting for him in Tombstone. But he did not feel regret. He felt the clean, sharp edge of a game played to its conclusion. Across the aisle, Stiles had his head in his hands. He wasn't looking out the window. He was looking inward, at the wreckage of his plans, already trying to salvage a piece of his future from the ruins. The train picked up speed, the click of the wheels on the track a steady, relentless rhythm, carrying the two lawmen away from the town they had sworn to protect and had ultimately betrayed. Chapter 19. The Tombstone jail wasn't like the one-room lockup in Wilcox. The Wilcox jail was a waiting room. This was a place to stay. It was built of stone and steel, 2 stories of cages stacked one on top of the other, all facing a narrow catwalk. It smelled of unwashed bodies, stale food, and disinfectant that couldn't quite kill the smell of human misery. The noise was constant, a man coughing in a cell down the row, the metallic echo of a boot on the catwalk, the distant clang of a steel door. The jailer who processed them was a man named O'Brien. He had a belly that strained the buttons of his uniform, and a face that looked like it had been left out in the rain too long. He knew who they were. Every guard in the building knew. "Well, well," O'Brien said, looking up from the ledger as he took their cuffs off. "Look what the train brought in. 2 of Cochise County's finest." He didn't smile. "Empty your pockets on the desk." Burt Alvord placed his pocketknife, a few coins and his watch on the scarred wood. He moved with a deliberate calm, watching O'Brien's hands, the way the man's eyes flicked over them, taking their measure. Billy Stiles fumbled with his pockets, his hands shaking. A deck of cards, a silver money clip with a few bills in it, a tin of pomade for his hair. He looked small without his new suit and his pearl gray hat. He just looked like a man in a cage. "Take off your boots," O'Brien said. He shook them, checking for hidden tools or money. He ran his hands over their clothes. It was a professional search, but there was an extra bit of pressure, an unnecessary roughness to it. It was a message. "You're not lawman anymore. You're just meat." "Cell 12, O'Brien said to another guard. "Put them in together. Let them keep each other company." The walk down the cell block was an education. Faces appeared at the bars as they passed. Hard faces, curious faces, faces that held a deep and satisfying hatred for the law. "Evening, deputies," a voice called out. "Heard you boys was coming to visit. Decided to see how the other half lives, Alvord." Another one jeered. Alvord didn't look at them. He kept his eyes forward, on the back of the guard's neck. He knew the first rule of being a prisoner: don't show weakness. Don't show fear. Don't show anything. The cell was a 6-by-8-foot box with 2 steel bunks, a bucket, and a patch of sky visible through a high barred window. The guard shoved them in and slammed the door. The sound of the bolt sliding home was a physical thing, a punch to the gut. Stiles immediately went to the bars, gripping them with white knuckles. This is a mistake. They can't do this. It's one man's word against ours. It's a dead man's word, Alvord said. He sat on the lower bunk. The mattress was a thin sack filled with straw that smelled of mold. That makes it holy. He looked at his partner. They can do this, Billy. They are doing it. There's got to be a way out, Stiles said, his voice frantic. He was pacing, a two-step shuffle in the tiny space. A lawyer. We can get a lawyer. With what money? Alvord asked. The 1,000 we have is buried. The rest is evidence. A lawyer costs cash. From the cell across the way, a man watched them. He was older, with a long gray beard and eyes that were too bright. Lawyers, the man said, his voice a dry rustle. A lawyer is just a man you pay to listen to your troubles. He don't make them go away. Stiles ignored him. We can make a deal. We know things. Other cases. Names. What names? Alvord asked. What do we know, Billy? We were good at our jobs. We didn't make deals with the men we arrested. We put them in jail. Maybe that was the mistake, Stiles muttered. The evening meal came on a tin plate shoved through a slot in the door. It was a gray stew with a piece of hard bread. Alvord ate his. He knew he'd need his strength. Stiles pushed his around the plate, then shoved it away. How can you eat that? Because I'm hungry, Alvord said. Later, as the lights in the cell block were dimmed, the taunts started again. Hey, Alvord. Remember me? You arrested me for horse theft in Benson last year. The voice belonged to a young cowboy named Kid Thompson. Alvord remembered him. Cocky, stupid, and fast with a gun he didn't know how to use. I remember, Alvord called back, his voice even. They're gonna hang you, you know. They hang men for robbing trains. And you're a lawman. They'll hang you twice. Maybe, Alvord said. What's it feel like? Knowing you're gonna dance on the end of a rope. Alvord lay on his bunk, his hands behind his head. He didn't answer. He was listening to the sounds of the jail, learning its rhythms. He was watching the way the guards walked, who was lazy, who was alert. He was a prisoner, but he was still a lawman. He was still assessing the situation. Stiles was a different animal. He wasn't assessing. He was trapped. He lay on the top bunk, a rigid line of terror in the darkness. Every time a guard walked past, he flinched. Burt, he whispered after a long silence. Yeah. What are you thinking about? About how this works, Alvord said. About who runs things in here. About the guards. I'm thinking about Heck Thomas, Stiles said. He's the one we need to talk to. He's a reasonable man. We could explain. Tell him Dunlap was the ringleader, that he forced us into it. Alvord was silent. He heard the lie in Stiles's voice, the desperate, pathetic story he was already constructing. A story with a villain and two victims. A story that might save his neck. You think he'd believe that? Alvord asked, his voice flat. He might. If one of us testified against the other. There it was. The calculation Alvord had seen in his eyes on the train. The next hand of poker. And Alvord knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as the stone floor, that Billy Stiles was getting ready to fold and to sell out the man holding the cards next to him. Get some sleep, Billy, Alvord said. But he knew neither of them would sleep. They would lie there in the darkness of the Tombstone jail, two partners in a crime that had finally caught up to them, listening to the clock tick down on the life they had known. One of them was thinking about survival. The other was thinking about betrayal. In that cell, they were the same thing. Chapter 20. He wants to see you. The lawyer's name was Pierce. He was a small man who seemed to be made entirely of dusty black cloth and nervous gestures. He stood on the other side of the bars, holding a leather briefcase like a shield. "Who does?" Burt Alvord asked. He stayed seated on his bunk. He didn't get up for lawyers. "Marshal Thomas," Pierce said, adjusting his spectacles. "He believes your partner is ready to make a statement. He thought you might wish to contribute." Billy Stiles, who had been pacing like a caged wolf since sunrise, stopped and grabbed the bars. "A statement? What kind of statement? Did he say what I'd get?" Alvord looked at Stiles, at the desperate hope in his eyes. It had been 2 months. 2 months of bad food, worse company, and the slow grinding pressure of the law. Stiles was breaking. Alvord had been waiting for it. "The marshal doesn't bargain, Mr. Stiles," the lawyer said primly. "He merely listens." "Tell him I'm not interested in talking," Alvord said. "Burt, don't be a fool," Stiles hissed. "This is our chance. We can work something out." "There's nothing to work out," Alvord said, his voice flat. He looked past Stiles at the lawyer. "Is that all?" Pierce cleared his throat. "There is one other matter. A personal one. A woman came to see me on your behalf, Mr. Alvord. A Mrs. Etta Place. She said she was an old family friend." Alvord's expression didn't change, but something inside him went still. Etta. He hadn't seen her in 5 years, not since before he'd pinned on the badge. He hadn't expected to ever see her again. "She left a package for you," Pierce said. He opened his briefcase. "Some reading material. And some personal effects she said you'd be missing." He pulled out a thick Bible bound in black leather, and a small, lumpy parcel wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "The guards have already inspected it. It's all approved." He passed the items through the bars. The Bible was heavy. Alvord took it, his thumb tracing the gold cross on the cover. "Tell her I said thank you," Alvord said. "She also left this for me to give you." Pierce slid a folded piece of paper through the bars. It was a note. Alvord took it. "Burt, what is this?" Stiles demanded. "Who is this woman?" "An old friend," Alvord said. He didn't open the note. He didn't need to. He knew what it would say. He sat back on his bunk, opened the Bible. The pages were crisp. Tucked into the book of Exodus was a thin, flat file, no thicker than a silver dollar. He closed the book. He opened the parcel. Inside was a bar of soap, a new razor, and a small whetstone. He picked up the whetstone. It felt right in his hand. Solid. Useful. "What are you smiling at?" Stiles asked, his voice laced with suspicion. "Just thinking about getting a clean shave," Alvord said. After the lawyer left, Stiles started in again. "We have to talk to Thomas, Burt. We can't just sit here and wait for them to hang us. That file, that little stone, you can't possibly think you can cut your way out of here." "No," Alvord said. He was looking at the guards, watching their routine. There were 3 on duty at night. O'Brien, the fat one, who sat at the main desk and mostly slept. A man named Coster, who walked the lower catwalk every hour on the hour. And a young one, Miller, who had the upper tier. Miller was the key. Alvord had been watching him for weeks. Miller was quiet. He never joined in the taunts. And twice Alvord had seen him get a letter from home that left him staring at the wall for an hour. "The window in this cell," Alvord said, his voice low. "The bars are set in sandstone. Not granite. The mortar is old." "You'd never get through it in time," Stiles whispered. "They'd hear you." "Not if there was a distraction," Alvord said. "Something to keep them busy." He looked at Stiles. "The trial is set for the middle of February. The 14th. "Valentine's Day," Stiles said, the irony lost on him. "There's a dance at the hotel every Valentine's Day," Alvord said. "Big affair. Most of the town goes." The guards who aren't on duty will be there. The ones who are will be thinking about it. It's a crazy plan. It's a better plan than turning on your partner to save your own neck, Alvord said, his voice hard and quiet. Stiles flinched. I'm just trying to be realistic, Burt. I'm trying to stay alive. So am I, Alvord said. That night, after the lights were out, Alvord waited. He listened to the sounds of the jail settling. A man snoring. The drip of a leaky pipe. At 2 a.m, Miller came by on his rounds. He walked slower than the other guards, his footsteps softer. Alvord was at the bars, a shadow in the darkness. Miller. The young guard stopped, startled. What do you want, Alvord? I heard your wife is sick. Miller's hand went to the pistol on his hip. How do you know about that? I used to be the law. I know how to find things out, Alvord said. I also know the doctor in this town charges a fortune, and a guard's pay doesn't go far. He held up the note the lawyer had given him. This is a bank draft for $200. It's waiting for you at the Bank of Tombstone. All you have to do is go and get it. Miller stared at the piece of paper. $200 was half a year's wages. What's the catch? On the night of February 14th, Alvord said, his voice a low whisper, you get called away from your post. A family emergency. A fire. I don't care what. You just disappear for half an hour, starting at midnight. They'll know, Miller whispered, his voice tight. They'll take my job. They might put me in here with you. They might, Alvord said. Or you might be $200 richer, and your wife might get the medicine she needs. A man has to weigh his choices. He slid the note through the bars. It lay on the stone floor of the catwalk, a small white rectangle in the gloom. Miller looked at the note. He looked down the dark cell block. He looked back at Alvord. He didn't say a word. He just bent down, picked up the paper, and walked away. Alvord stood at the bars for a long time, listening to the guard's footsteps fade. He had the tool. He had the plan. He had the guard. Now all he needed was the time. He went back to his bunk and lay down, the whetstone in his hand. He felt its rough, abrasive surface. It was a tool for sharpening, for making a dull thing dangerous. He closed his eyes and began to wait for Valentine's Day. Chapter 21. From the high window of their cell, they could hear the music from the hotel. A fiddle and a piano, thin and reedy on the cold night air. It was Valentine's Day. In the cells down the row, men who hadn't seen a woman in a year were howling at the moon. Sounds like they're having a good time, Billy Stiles said. He was standing on the lower bunk, peering through the bars at the sliver of town he could see. They are, Burt Alvord said. He was sitting on the floor, his back against the stone wall, the file in his hand. He wasn't listening to the music. He was listening to the jail, to the rhythm of the guard's footsteps, the timing of the coughs and curses from the other prisoners. He had been working for a week, a few minutes each night when the jail was loudest, scraping at the mortar around the bottom of one of the window bars. The dust he collected in a fold of his blanket. The sound was a high, thin whisper that was easily lost in the noise of the jail. It's almost midnight, Stiles said, his voice tight. What if he doesn't show? He'll show, Alvord said. $200 buys a lot of reliability. At 11:30, the fight started on the lower tier. It was between Kid Thompson, the horse thief, and a miner doing 6 months for assault. Alvord had arranged it 3 days ago, for a share of the tobacco Etta had sent. It started with a shouted insult, then the sound of a tin cup thrown against bars, and then the whole cell block erupted. Men were yelling, banging cups on the steel doors, screaming for the guards. O'Brien, the fat jailer, swore and heaved himself out of his chair. Coster, the other downstairs guard, ran toward the noise. It was a good distraction. loud, messy, and on the opposite side of the jail from their cell. Alvord stood up and went to work on the bar in earnest. The file felt hot in his hand. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound grated on his nerves, but it was drowned out by the riot downstairs. "He's not here," Stiles whispered, his face pressed to the bars of the cell door, watching the catwalk. "It's 5 minutes to 12. Miller's not here." "He's late," Alvord said, not stopping. He could feel the mortar giving way, crumbling to dust. Then a boy's voice from the front of the jail, high with panic. "Guard Miller. Is Guard Miller here? It's his wife. The doctor says he has to come now." Alvord paused. He heard Miller's voice, a low question. He heard O'Brien, distracted from the fight, yell, "Go on then. Get out of here. We'll handle it." The main door opened and closed. Miller was gone. "He did it," Stiles breathed. "He actually did it." "Get over here and help me," Alvord said. They put their hands on the bar and pulled. It was stiff, wedged tight with a century of rust and grime. They pulled again, their muscles straining. Alvord felt a sharp pain in his shoulder. The bar groaned, a low, tortured sound, and then it moved. Just an inch, but it was enough. They worked it back and forth, loosening it, until they could pull it free from the crumbling sandstone. The opening was barely a foot wide. "I can't fit through that," Stiles said, his voice rising in panic. "You'll fit," Alvord said. He looked at Stiles, at the fear on his face. "Or you can stay. Your choice." He shoved the Bible and the parcel of shaving gear through the opening, then began to squeeze himself through, feet first. The stone scraped his ribs, tore at his shirt. For a moment he was stuck, his shoulders wedged tight. He exhaled, made himself smaller, and pushed. He came free, tumbling onto a narrow stone ledge 2 stories above the alley. The night air was shockingly cold. Below, the alley was a river of black shadow. Etta had done her part. A thick rope, the kind used for hauling freight, was tied to the base of the water tower on the roof and coiled neatly on the ledge. "Come on," Alvord hissed, turning back to the window. Stiles was struggling, his face pale in the moonlight. "I'm stuck, Burt. I can't move." "You're not stuck. You're scared. Now get out here." From the end of the catwalk, they heard footsteps. Heavy. Unhurried. Coster. He'd finished with the fight and was starting his rounds early. "Billy, now." Alvord's voice was a whip crack. The fear of the guard was greater than the fear of the squeeze. Stiles gave a desperate, grunting shove and fell through the opening, landing in a heap on the ledge. The footsteps were closer. They could see the yellow halo of Coster's lantern bobbing at the far end of the cell block. Alvord uncoiled the rope and threw it down. It hit the ground with a soft thud. "Go. Hand over hand. Don't look down." Stiles stared at the rope, then at the drop. "I can't." "The hell you can't," Alvord said. He grabbed Stiles by the front of his shirt. "You wanted out. This is out. Now go." The lantern was halfway down the catwalk. Coster would see the empty cell in 30 seconds. Stiles swung himself over the edge, his hands gripping the rope, his new boots scrabbling for a hold on the stone wall. He went down fast, half sliding, the rope burning his hands. He hit the ground in a heap. Alvord followed, his movements quick and sure. He'd climbed ropes before. He landed light on his feet next to Stiles, who was groaning, trying to get his wind back. A shout from above. Alarm. Prisoner escape. A gunshot cracked the night, the bullet whining off the stone wall high above their heads. Alvord pulled Stiles to his feet. "Run." They scrambled out of the alley and into the back streets of Tombstone. Behind them, the jail was coming alive. Bells were ringing, men were shouting. They ran through the darkness, 2 shadows moving away from the light, the distant sound of the Valentine's Day fiddle, playing a song that had nothing to do with them anymore. They were outside the law again, and the only thing that mattered was the ground beneath their feet and the darkness ahead. Chapter 22. There's nothing left to eat. Billy Stiles set it to the fire, not to Burt Alvord. The fire was a miserable thing, just a handful of twigs burning in a shallow pit, giving off more smoke than heat. They were holed up in an abandoned adobe hut somewhere in the Dragoon Mountains, a place that felt like the end of the world. They'd been running for 3 days. The adrenaline was gone, replaced by the gnawing ache of hunger and the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of men who hadn't slept in a real bed or eaten a hot meal in what felt like a lifetime. "There's coffee," Alvord said. He was sitting with his back to the crumbling wall, the rifle across his lap. He hadn't put the rifle down since they'd left Tombstone. He was watching the landscape, the gray rocks and the skeletal trees, as if he expected Heck Thomas himself to rise up from the ground. "A man can't live on coffee," Stiles said. He rubbed his hands together, the skin raw and blistered from the rope. "My hands are infected, Burt. They're starting to swell." Alvord didn't look at him. "We'll find a town. Get supplies." "What town?" Stiles's voice cracked. "Every town from here to the border has a telegraph. Every telegraph has our names on it. There's a price on our heads. You think we can just walk into a general store and buy bacon and bandages?" "We can if we're careful," Alvord said. His voice was flat, devoid of hope or despair. It was the voice of a man dealing with a set of facts. "There is no careful anymore," Stiles said. He stood up and began to pace the small hut, his new boots scuffing in the dirt floor. The boots were ruined now, the shine gone, the leather scraped and cut. "Don't you see? We're done. We're just kicking the can down the road, waiting for them to catch up. And they will catch up. A man like Thomas doesn't stop." Alvord finally turned his head and looked at his partner. He saw the wildness in Stiles's eyes, the frayed edges of a man coming apart. He'd been watching it happen for 3 days. The confident poker player was gone. This was just a man holding a losing hand, and he knew it. "So what are you saying, Billy?" "I'm saying this isn't a life," Stiles said, gesturing at the miserable hut, the empty landscape. "Hiding in holes, starving, waiting for a bullet. I'd rather be in that cell, in Tombstone. At least it was warm. At least we got fed. You want to go back. I want to make a deal." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been holding them in for days. "I can talk to Thomas. I can tell him what happened. I can tell him it was Dunlap's idea. That you were the one who planned the escape. I can give him something." Alvord looked at him for a long moment. He wasn't surprised. He wasn't even angry. He had seen this coming on the train out of Wilcox. It was just the final card being played. "You'd testify against me." "I'd tell the truth," Stiles said, but he couldn't meet Alvord's eyes. "Some of it. Enough of it. To get a lighter sentence. Maybe 5 years. 10. Not a rope. A man can live through 10 years in Yuma. He can't live through a hanging." "And what do I get out of this deal?" Alvord asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "You get to keep running," Stiles said. "They'll be looking for me then. I'll be the star witness. It'll take the heat off you. Give you a head start." Alvord gave a short, bitter laugh. "You sell me out to save your neck, and you call it giving me a head start." "I call it being practical," Stiles said, his voice pleading now. "This was never going to work, Burt. Not really. We were fools to think it would. We had a good run, but the game's over. I'm just trying to get out with some of my chips." Alvord stood up. He was taller than Stiles, and in the cramped space of the hut he seemed to fill it. He walked over to the fire and kicked it apart with his boot. The small flames died, leaving behind a plume of smoke and a few glowing embers. There's a horse and a half canteen of water outside, Alvord said. He had found 2 horses tethered outside a ranch house the night before. One was a strong-looking bay. The other was an old mare with a limp. Which one do you want? Stiles stared at him. What? You're going back. I'm not. We're splitting up. So which horse do you want? You're not going to try and stop me? Why would I? Alvord said. You made your choice. A long time ago, probably. You're not the kind of man who can live outside the law, Billy. You just liked the idea of it. He went to the corner of the hut where their meager supplies were. He took one of the 2 remaining blankets. He picked up the canteen. The bay is faster. You'll make it back to Tombstone in 2 days if you push him. Stiles watched, his face a mixture of relief and something that looked almost like shame. Burt. Don't, Alvord said, cutting him off. Don't say you're sorry. You're not. You're just scared. And don't wish me luck. You don't want me to have any. He slung the blanket over his shoulder and picked up the rifle. I'll take the mare. She'll be slower, but she'll draw less attention. They walked out of the hut into the cold gray light of dawn. The 2 horses stood tethered to a dead tree, their breath misting in the air. Alvord untied the mare. He checked her hooves, ran a hand down her leg. She was old, but she was steady. He threw the blanket over her back. Stiles untied the bay. He couldn't seem to look at Alvord. He swung himself into the saddle, his movements clumsy. He gathered the reins, his blistered hands fumbling with the leather. So this is it, Stiles said to the horse's ears. This is it, Alvord agreed. Stiles finally looked at him. They'll catch you, Burt. Maybe, Alvord said. But they'll have to earn it. Without another word, Stiles turned the bay's head east, back toward the world of laws and jails and deals. He kicked the horse into a trot and didn't look back. Alvord watched him go, a solitary figure shrinking against the vast, indifferent landscape. He watched until Stiles was just a speck, and then nothing at all. He was alone now. Truly alone. The last member of the Wilcox train robbers. He turned and looked west, toward the deeper mountains, toward Mexico, toward a future that was nothing but a long, hard run. He swung himself onto the old mare's back. She wasn't much, but she was pointed the right way. He nudged her forward, and the 2 of them began to walk, leaving the hut and the dead fire and the man he used to call his partner behind. Chapter 23. Billy Stiles didn't ride into Tombstone like a man surrendering. He rode in like a man arriving for a business meeting. He'd used the last of his water to wash the trail dust from his face and slick back his hair. He'd brushed his ruined suit as best he could. He rode the bay straight down Allen Street in the middle of the afternoon, ignoring the stairs, and dismounted in front of the hotel where he knew the marshal was staying. He tied the horse to the hitching post and walked inside, his blistered hands balled into fists at his sides. Heck Thomas was in the lobby, reading a day-old newspaper. He looked up as Stiles approached, his pale blue eyes showing no surprise. He folded the paper and set it aside. I figured you'd be along, Thomas said. You look thirsty. I've been thirstier, Stiles said, though his throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. He stood before the marshal's chair. I'm here to make a statement. A man who breaks out of jail usually runs the other way, Thomas observed. Not back to the man who put him there. I'm not running, Stiles said. I'm correcting the record. Thomas gestured to the chair opposite him. Correct it then. Stiles sat. He leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. He had rehearsed this for 2 days in the saddle. It was Alvord, he began. It was always Alvord. From the start. He was the one who was tired of the 30-a-month pay. He was the one who watched the trains, who made the plans. I was a fool. I was young, and he was my superior officer. I looked up to him. I thought he knew what he was doing. Thomas listened. He didn't interrupt. He just watched Stiles's face, his own expression as still and patient as a stone. Dunlap was his man too, Stiles continued, the story gaining momentum. Alvord found him. And the other one, the Yaqui. Alvord recruited them all. I was just supposed to watch his back. That's what he told me. He said nobody would get hurt, that it was a perfect plan. And the escape? Thomas asked, his first question. Was that his plan too? Yes, Stiles said, seizing on it. He had it all worked out. A woman on the outside. A bribed guard. I didn't know anything about it until that night. He had the file, the rope. He told me if I didn't go with him, he'd kill me in my sleep. Said a dead partner tells no tales. The lie was a good one. It felt good in his mouth. It sounded plausible. It painted a picture of a man trapped, a victim of a stronger will. And where is he now? Thomas asked. Headed for Mexico, Stiles said without hesitation. He took the better horse. Said he had friends in Sonora. Said he'd be across the border before you even knew he was gone. Thomas was silent for a long moment. He looked at Stiles's ruined boots, his raw hands, the desperate sincerity in his eyes. You'd be willing to testify to all this? In a court of law? Under oath? I would, Stiles said. All I want is a fair hearing. A chance to tell my side of it. A man who helps the government catch a fugitive, a dangerous fugitive like Burt Alvord, is often shown a certain amount of consideration, Thomas said, choosing his words carefully. The territorial prosecutor is an ambitious man. He'd rather have a conviction for the ringleader than a long, expensive trial for a follower. I'm not asking for favors, Stiles said, though that was exactly what he was doing. I'm just asking for justice. The deal was struck not with a handshake, but with a nod. Stiles was taken not to the jail, but to a clean room in the hotel with a guard posted outside the door. He was given a hot meal, a bath, and a doctor to tend to his hands. He slept for 12 hours in a real bed, and when he woke, he felt like a new man. He felt like a survivor. His testimony was the talk of the territory. The newspapers called him the deputy who saw the light. He stood in the witness box, dressed in a new suit provided by the U.S. Marshal's office, and he told his story. He was convincing. He was remorseful. He painted Burt Alvord as a cold, calculating mastermind who had corrupted a loyal subordinate. He told them everything, except the parts that made him look guilty. In exchange for his full cooperation, the charges against Billy Stiles were dropped. The government of the Arizona Territory granted him a full pardon. The manhunt for Burt Alvord, now officially branded the sole architect of the Wilcox robbery, intensified. 6 months later, Billy Stiles pinned on a new badge. It wasn't for Cochise County. It was for the Southern Pacific Railroad. Fletcher himself offered him the job. A man who knows how outlaws think is a valuable asset, he'd said. Stiles was assigned to the express car, riding the same route he had once watched with envy. He was good at his job. He was alert, he was ruthless, and he knew all the tricks because he had used them himself. He had won. He had played the game and come out on top. He had a steady job, good pay, and the respect of his employers. The past was buried. But the West was a place that didn't believe in burying the past. 4 years later, in a dusty rail yard in a town called Naco on the Mexican border, Stiles, now a deputy sheriff again, tried to serve a warrant on a man named Bill Downing for fraud. Downing had other ideas. The gunfight was short and pointless over a matter that had nothing to do with trains or stolen money. It was just another Tuesday, another warrant, another man who didn't want to be arrested. When the smoke cleared, Bill Downing was dead, and Billy Stiles was lying in the dirt, a bullet in his chest, looking up at a sky that was as empty and indifferent as it had been the day he'd ridden away from Burt Alvord. He had survived the biggest gamble of his life, only to be taken out by a $2 hand he never saw coming. Chapter 24. The air in the port of Corinto was thick enough to drink. It tasted of salt, diesel, and rotting fruit. Burt Alvord, who now called himself Mr. Brown, sat at a rickety table on the wharf, a bottle of warm beer in front of him, and watched a steamship being loaded with bananas. He'd been watching for an hour. He wasn't in a hurry. He had learned a new kind of patience in the 5 years since he'd ridden a lame mare away from Billy Stiles. His face was different now. The sun had burned it the color of old leather, and a thick mustache covered his upper lip. He wore white linen suits that were always damp with sweat, and he carried a Belgian pistol tucked into his waistband instead of a Colt on his hip. He was heavier, softer around the middle. The money had been good. A man in a white uniform, with too much gold braid on the shoulders, sat down opposite him without being invited. His name was General Reyes, and he was the third General Alvord had done business with this year. Generals came and went in this part of the world. Rifles, however, were always in demand. "The coffee is terrible here, Brown," the general said in Spanish. "A national disgrace." "I'm not here for the coffee, General," Alvord replied in the same language. His Spanish was fluent now, learned in cantinas and back rooms from Panama to Peru. "No. You are here for my money. And I am here for your merchandise." Reyes smiled, a flash of gold teeth. "My man saw your boat arrive last night. He said it sits low in the water." "It's a heavy cargo," Alvord said. 200 Krag Jorgensen rifles and 10,000 rounds of ammunition. Fresh from the war in Cuba. The United States Army has no more use for them. But I thought you might. 200, Reyes mused. He took a long, thin cigar from his pocket and lit it. My revolution could use 200 rifles. The question is, can my revolution afford them? Your revolution can't afford not to have them, Alvord said. The last general who tried to take the capital with single-shot Remingtons is currently hanging from a lamp-post in the Plaza de Armas. Reyes laughed, a short barking sound. You are a practical man, Brown. I like this. No talk of freedom or the people. Just business. He blew a plume of smoke toward the banana boat. The price is 5,000 American dollars. In gold. The price is 7,000, Alvord said. And the gold is to be on my boat before the rifles come off it. They haggled for 10 minutes. It was a dance Alvord knew well. They settled on 6,500. My men will meet you at the old sugar mill at midnight, Reyes said, standing up. Come alone. I always come alone, General. After Reyes left, Alvord finished his beer. He was a gun runner. It was a strange thing to think. He'd gone from being the law to breaking it, and now he was selling it in a way. Selling the tools to make new laws or break old ones. It didn't matter to him which. It was just a living. A good one. But he was always looking over his shoulder. Every time a new American face appeared in a port town, he felt a cold knot in his stomach. He'd read about Billy's death in a week-old newspaper he'd found in a hotel in Guatemala. It had been a small article, just a few lines about a deputy killed in the line of duty. It hadn't mentioned Wilcox or the train. Alvord had felt nothing. Or maybe he'd felt a small, cold satisfaction. Billy had made his deal. And the house had finally claimed its due. He paid for his beer and walked down the wharf toward his boat, a small, ugly tramp steamer called the Sea Serpent. As he passed a warehouse, 2 American sailors stumbled out, drunk and laughing. One of them bumped into him, hard. "Watch it, friend," the sailor said, his words slurred. Alvord just nodded and kept walking. But then the sailor's friend clapped the man on the back. "Leave him be, Heck. The man's got business." Alvord froze. Heck. The name hit him like a physical blow. He turned slowly. The sailor was just a boy, 20 years old, with a stupid, drunken grin on his face. It wasn't him. It couldn't be. But the fear was a real thing. It was a taste in the back of his throat, a cold sweat on his skin. He hadn't heard that name in 5 years, but he had never stopped listening for it. He walked faster, his hand resting on the butt of the Belgian pistol. He got to his boat and locked himself in his cabin, his heart pounding. He had money. He had a new name, a new life. He could go anywhere in the world. But he was still in that jail, in Tombstone. He was still looking over his shoulder for a tall man with pale blue eyes. He had run 1,000 miles, but he hadn't gotten anywhere. That night, under a sliver of a moon, he sailed the Sea Serpent up a muddy river to the ruined sugar mill. The deal went smoothly. Reyes's men were professionals. They counted the gold, and Alvord's crew offloaded the rifles. There was no talk, just the quiet, efficient work of men engaged in a dangerous business. As he sailed back down the river toward the open sea, the $6,500 in gold locked in his safe, Alvord stood at the rail and looked at the dark jungle sliding by. He had everything a man could want. He was rich. He was his own boss. He was free. But the freedom was a cage of its own. He could never go home. He could never stop looking over his shoulder. He could never be Burt Alvord again. He was just Mr. Brown, a man who sold guns in hot, forgotten countries, a ghost who was afraid of a name. The freedom he had killed and stolen for wasn't freedom at all. It was just a longer rope. Chapter 25. The fog's coming in early. The woman who ran the boarding house said it from the doorway, her arms folded across her apron. Burt Alvord, who for the last 10 years had been a man named George Parsons, looked out the window at the gray mist rolling in off the San Francisco Bay. It swallowed the ships at the docks, then the docks themselves, then began to eat the street. "It does that," he said. His voice was a dry rasp, and the effort of speaking sent a tremor through his chest, a deep wet cough that he tried to stifle in a handkerchief. "You ought to see the doctor about that," the woman, Mrs. Gable, said. She had a kind face, but her eyes were practical. A sick boarder was a problem. "That's been going on for a week now." "It's just a cold," Alvord said. He folded the handkerchief and put it back in his pocket. It was damp. He'd come back to the States a year ago, drifting into California with what was left of the gun-running money. It hadn't been as much as he'd thought. A bad investment in a Nicaraguan mine, a partner who disappeared with a payroll, the slow erosion of time and whiskey. He wasn't poor, but he wasn't rich. He was just an old man with a bad cough, living in a rented room that smelled of damp wool and fried bacon. He'd chosen San Francisco because it was a city that didn't ask questions. It had been rebuilt from the earthquake and the fire, a new city full of new people who were too busy looking forward to worry about a man's past. He'd seen a moving picture show. He'd ridden in a Ford automobile. The world had gotten loud and fast, and he felt like a man watching it all from behind a pane of thick glass. He put on his hat and coat. The coat was heavy wool, but he still felt the chill. "I'm going for a walk." "Don't go far," Mrs. Gable said. "You'll get lost in that fog, and we won't find you till spring." The street was quiet, the fog muffling the sounds of the city. The clatter of a horse-drawn wagon was a dull thud, the clang of a distant cable car a muffled bell. He walked toward the waterfront, his steps slow. Every breath was an effort. He remembered riding for days through the Arizona desert, the sun beating down, the air so clean and hot it felt like it could burn the sickness out of a man. This damp, cold air just seemed to invite it in. He stopped at a newsstand and bought a paper. The headlines were about President Taft and some trouble with the trusts. He saw a small article on an inside page. Former U.S. Marshal Heck Thomas dies of Bright's disease. Alvord read the short paragraph. It called Thomas a hero, a legend of the Old West. It mentioned his famous capture of the Dalton gang, his relentless pursuit of outlaws. It didn't mention the Wilcox train robbers. It didn't mention him. He folded the paper and tucked it under his arm. So the ghost was gone. It didn't make him feel any safer. It didn't make him feel anything at all. He sat on a bench watching the fog swirl. He wasn't Burt Alvord anymore. He wasn't Mr. Brown, the gun runner. He was George Parsons, a retired investor, a man with no history. The man who had robbed a train, broken out of the Tombstone jail, and sailed the Caribbean with a hold full of rifles was a character in a book he'd read a long time ago. The cough came back, harder this time. It bent him double, a racking, tearing thing that left him dizzy and gasping for air. When it passed, he tasted blood. He knew Mrs. Gable was right. He walked to the doctor's office she'd recommended. The doctor was young, with a crisp white coat and spectacles. He listened to Alvord's chest with a cold stethoscope. "Pneumonia," the doctor said, his voice matter-of-fact. "Both lungs. You should be in a hospital." "I don't like hospitals," Alvord said. "Then you should be in bed," the doctor said. "And you shouldn't be out in this fog." He wrote a prescription for a patent medicine that probably wouldn't do any good, and charged Alvord $2. He walked back to the boarding house. Climbing the 2 flights of stairs to his room felt like climbing a mountain. He sat on the edge of his bed, the doctor's words echoing in his ears. Pneumonia. It was such a simple word. Such a common way to die. He had spent his life dodging bullets and posses and double-crossing partners. He had always assumed it would be a gun that ended it. A marshal's Colt or a jealous husband's shotgun. Not this. Not a quiet, wheezing surrender in a damp room. He lay down, still in his coat. He was too tired to take it off. He looked around the room. A cheap dresser, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, a single chair. The sum total of his life. The gold from General Reyes was long gone. The thrill of the robbery was a faint memory. All he had left was a cough that was slowly filling his lungs with water. He must have slept. When he woke, it was dark outside. Mrs. Gable was standing over him with a bowl of soup. "You need to eat something," she said. He tried, but he couldn't swallow. He pushed the bowl away. "I'll leave it here," she said. Her practical eyes were soft with a pity he didn't want. "You just rest." She took the lamp, leaving him in the near darkness, the only light coming from the gas lamp on the street below, filtered through the fog. He lay there, listening to the sound of his own breathing. It was a wet, ragged sound, the sound of a machine breaking down. He wasn't thinking of Heck Thomas or Billy Stiles. He wasn't thinking of the money. He was thinking of the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light in the Wilcox jail. He remembered the creak of his chair, the smell of the dry desert air. He remembered the taste of the beef stew at the hotel. It was a simple thing. A good hot meal at the end of a long, boring day. He had thrown it all away for a life of running. And now, at the end of the run, all he wanted was to be back in that quiet room, in that creaking chair, waiting for supper. The cough started again, but he was too weak to fight it. It was a storm inside him, and he was just a ship being broken apart. He felt a strange calm settle over him. The game was over. The house had won. It always did. He felt a final, deep chill spread through him, a cold that had nothing to do with the fog outside. He pulled the thin wool blanket up to his chin. The effort was immense. He closed his eyes. The ragged sound of his breathing softened, then faded, then stopped. Outside, the foghorn on the bay called out once, a long, lonesome note, and then the city fell silent. Love audiobooks? Get over 100 Wild Western audiobook on YouTube. Subscribe for full listens, no fluff. Wild Western Roundup. Want even more action-packed adventures in the Wild West? Join the posse. Download your free copy of Wrangler today. Or keep reading the Rip Campbell Wild Western series in Amazon. The end.